Where I'd like to convene the joint meeting of City Council and Finance Advisory Committee. Ask for a roll call.
Jacobson?
Here.
Fanouken?
Here.
Marquardt?
Here.
Snow?
Here.
Noriko?
Here.
Baker? Favor?
Here.
Ray?
Here.
7 council members. Tarazinski?
Here.
Neely?
Here.
Verbeck?
Here.
Conlon?
Here.
Parch?
Here.
Peddle?
Here.
6 present.
Okay, thank you. Moving next to public participation. Dwayne Brown.
Yes, I want to watch the election results tonight after the meeting. It's always amazing how the dead can vote in Chicago. There's a man been dead since 2007. He voted in November 2nd of 2010, and I expect him to vote this year. Simply amazing, I tell you. I'm glad DeKalb's portion of the property tax is only about 9%. If it were 62% like the District 428 would be, it would be devastating for the taxpayers. The Capital Improvement Fund accounts for the capital cost associated with city buildings, street improvements, bikeway paths, park improvements, etc. Budgeted revenues for fiscal year 2017 are $360,000. This revenue is 2 cents of the total 3.5 cents per gallon. The other 1.5 cents is dedicated to paying the debt of the public safety building. This should all be allocated to streets. Other sources of revenue should be found for the city's building, bikeway, and park improvements. The motor fuel tax for fiscal year 2017 lists $100,000 for salt and $100,000 for street maintenance, which could be inadequate if we have a severe winter. The balance is projected to decrease $586,622, or 20.81% in the fiscal year 2017. Equipment budgeted for 2017 includes furniture for City Hall costing $20,000. That seems excessive to me. Building permit fees, a total of $410,000 is projected to be received in the fiscal year 2017. This is a huge increase. Is this a realistic number? The total of $205,000 in video gaming tax is expected to be collected, almost doubled in 12 months. Too bad we have a moratorium on new businesses. The amount budgeted for fire and police pensions has been increased $3,473,470 in fiscal year 2015 to $5,492,904 for fiscal year 2017. That's good. However, unfunded amounts increased over the past year to 50.4%, from 51.4% for police, and from 41.4% to 40.5% for the fire pension fund. It's not just the possibility of a 10.8% tax levy increases that trouble the taxpayers, but other issues such as college for their children, which has increased 11 times since 1980, while inflation overall has increased 3 times, diluting education with for-profits and saddling millions with debt. Americans owe $1.3 trillion in student debt alone. The average student debt for a 2016 graduate is $37,172. Another worry for taxpayers is that Social Security rates will increase, or the retirement age, or both. The combined trust funds will run out by the year 2034 unless changes are made. The taxpayers are also expecting tax increases in 2017 when the school board has to refinance $108 million in bonds, and the county board asked for funds for the health department, which were cut by the state. I hope a capital improvement plan is adopted and provides sustainable funding for the next 5 to 10 years. I urge the Finance Advisory Committee to not recommend a 10.8% tax levy increase on the already overburdened taxpayer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Seeing no other,
There was one
Kathy.
more comment. I don't know, I want to make sure everyone saw this, was kind of buried in your packet, but it was coming from a resident that wanted to share this for input with the committee on SSA number 3. If you don't have it, we have extra copies.
It's in our agenda. I don't see it.
It's loose.
It's in that group.
It's in this book.
We can pass out copies.
Oh, here. Input for the committee. It's behind the tax levy exhibit. It's about the 6th page in, behind the tax levy.
Yeah.
And,
It's a letter.
Yeah. We are good. We also have one.
Alderman Markart, do you need one?
No.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that additional input, Kathy. Okay, moving then to our first item this evening, the financial policies. We do have updated attachments. I'll turn to Finance Director Haley.
So I apologize for the delay in getting these out, but I made copies for everyone. There were just a few changes. First, on the very first page of the budget policy, we added that item 1. Everyone have it? And then, that change is not new. On the fund balance, we put the wording, and I did go back and would listen to the meeting several times, but as I talked with the city manager's office, we don't have a funding source at this time. We do review these policies every year with the budget process, so we put the wording in to say, the capital projects fund should work towards establishing a fund balance at a minimum dollar amount to meet the planned improvements identified in a multi-year capital replacement schedule, with the intent of reviewing this every year. So hoping to have a funding mechanism come FY18, or a recommendation thereof. Then the next page, the water operating fund, we actually put this back to the way it was. I think it was worded pretty well. There is already a funding mechanism for capital. So the operating fund, we left unrestricted net assets at the water fund will be maintained at a minimum level equal to 25% of the annual budgeted operational expenses plus the budgeted capital improvements. And then I had just identified the 2 other capital funds. I added more than 1 year to the capital equipment replacement fund, which is a new policy in that. And then there's one more change.
Just one question on the water before we leave that.
Uh-huh.
So under the water operating fund, we're going to have in there the 25% plus the next year's budgeted capital improvement amount.
And that is what was in there to begin with, so we thought we'd keep it.
I understood that. That was a debate a long time
We-
ago.
We do have a formal 10-year water capital plan that has
Right.
been approved by the city council that is incorporated in the budget process
Right.
annually above and beyond this.
Well, the reason I'm questioning
policy.
this is I'm wondering, and I guess it's my understanding that we're going to run all water capital through the water capital project fund, that we'd actually move the revenue and keep the fund balance, the operating fund balance at the 25%, and then anything excess would go to the capital fund, and then that would be used to support the capital plan, and it would need to have a full year's revenue based in it so that it could operate in the capital fund itself, rather than running it through operations?
Currently, the dedicated revenue to the capital projects fund is the 66.67% of the increase, which isn't enough to sustain that 10-year capital plan.
Right?
So at the beginning or middle or during the budget process, the intent is to move or transfer general funds, or water operating funds to the capital project fund based on what is being approved during the budget process by FAC and the city council.
Okay, so at the time, let's say we had $2 million in water capital projects, we will literally transfer that to the capital fund?
If that is what is needed to cover the budgeted dollar expenses in that budget, yes.
But Can I,
Okay.
can I add one other thing? If you recall, when we did the Burns and McDonald study, one of the techniques that the consultant had identified that the city could use is IEPA low-interest loans.
Right.
And so we have actually taken an item to council that Director Holdeman can talk about. So there may be a situation where you don't have all those dollars up front if the council chooses to move forward and utilizing an IEPA loan to pay for those infrastructure improvements.
Sure. And I would hope that would be part of our budget process, that that was in fact necessary and evident. I guess that's why I would like, suggest that the 25% operating fund be kept at its necessary balance, and that the difference be transferred to the capital projects fund, and then any subsequent loans that might be necessary would then be run through the capital projects fund, so it is clean as can be. Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah, we actually talked about this before. There, in this particular paragraph with respect to the water operating fund, I think it's important to be on the same page. First of all, when you say plus the budgeted capital improvements, that does not have a timeline attached to it, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to build up your capital projects fund. So I think it's fine the way that it's worded. Plus the budgeted capital improvements, or plus budgeted rather than plus budgeted capital improvement. Now, I agree with Mr. Tarazinski that we had a discussion about the fact that if you exceeded 25% in the reserves for the operating fund, that those funds would be transferred each year into the capital projects fund. That's what I remember.
At the end of the audit? Would you do it at the end of the audit?
Yeah, I mean, you would do it at the end of the audit. Yeah, that's fine. But the whole point is we've already talked about the fact that the funding sources are inadequate right now to pay for the full capital improvements plan for the water system. Now, as an enterprise fund, ultimately you want the thing to be self-sustaining. And one of the ways of moving that way is if you have an operating surplus, you move that to the capital fund so that you reduce the need for potential borrowing, even if it's a low interest borrow. It may be well, it's more costly than paying out of your own pocket.
I would just add that the loan that we're looking at is 50% principal forgiveness, so up to $1.5 million. So half of that, $750,000, would be
Well, and that
forgivable. So that's
in
pretty
the
good.
budget process,
Yeah.
that would be an appropriate discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
Alderman Snow?
We've been talking about operating surpluses, but obviously these are estimates. You could have a year where you have an operating deficit. Does that, the flip side of that mean you would be transferring money back from the capital fund into the reserves? Or, I mean, is this a one-way transfer, which, since we're dealing with estimates and revenues that by their very nature will fluctuate year to year? I just
a
kind of
comment.
raised that issue.
Yeah, just to comment on that. I think we had an extensive discussion about that at the time we discussed this. And part of the concern was that there would be no leakage of capital funds in the 4% increase in water over an extended period of time that would leak back into operations. That is, the full intent of the portion of the increase that was capital should not be used for operations, and that operation adjustments then would be necessary to keep
Yeah, but we're
the
not talking-
operations separate.
We're not talking about leakage of capital funds, we're talking about moving operating funds into the capital budget when there's a surplus of operating funds.
Right. Yeah,
And that, you know, moving money back, if you already moved operating funds that were excess, you're not really, and you need to move them back to the reserve, you're not really moving back capital funds that were budgeted for capital expenses, you're moving back money that was operating expenses. I'm just saying that's an estimate.
Sure.
And if you're always taking money out but never putting money in, I'm not sure that's,
What
A
is,
wise policy.
what's an estimate of?
well, we're figuring out fiscal year 17 budget. Everything in fiscal year 17 budget is an estimate.
Yeah, no, but that's not what we were saying.
Yeah, but you're saying at the end of that year, if there's an excess, you're moving it there, and then in fiscal year 18, you don't know what, you're again estimating those revenues and expenses, and if you're short in operating expenses, what are you going to do to that reserve fund?
You don't touch it.
Right.
You just let it,
You don't touch it.
you let it
You-
decrease.
You.
Okay,
you
I just
let-
want to make
you
sure
let-
everybody's clear on
You
what's
let,
going on.
you don't comply with your fund balance, and then, in the following year, you, hope that recovers, but one of the things that we had talked about is looking at 1 year's fund balance is probably not a best practice. What you would do is you would roll, probably do a 3-year rolling average of your fund balance. And when we discussed this, actually, I know that my opinion was that there should be this transfer, but I also built in a cushion. So I said something like over 27%. And we probably don't have to go into details with making that particular decision tonight. But what I was saying is, okay, 25% is cutting it so that the situation that you're talking about is more likely to occur. If we moved that up and said any fund balance over 27%, or whatever number you want to pick that's above 25, you reduce the chances of being in the situation that you're talking about. Because I agree that you're cutting off your nose to spite your face in the long term if you have a structural problem with that fund balance.
But, you know, when we're talking about, at least state, I've quite often seen when there's rigid rules like that, departments spend the money down because they know if they don't, they're gonna lose it. And it's because of the hard and fast rules, not because of operational needs. I think there's a danger of that.
Okay?
I would just make it clear that the portion of the increase, so that 3%, there was a 4.5% increase for 5 years, 3% of that revenue, which was projected to be about $250,000 annually by Burns and McDonnell, and then cumulative is directly hitting the capital fund. It is directly hitting there, so.
Right. Okay.
The last change that we had been looking at, so it's in the debt management policy under number 4, capital improvement program. The CIP should be revised and supplemented each year to maintain and test compliance with the city's debt management policy, which is financial policy number 0107. All the other changes had been discussed at the last meeting.
Move approval of the changes in financial policies as amended.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded, moved by Chair Peddle, seconded by Ron Parch. Further discussion? Seeing Mike.
Just one comment that, back to the budget policies, if we could begin to start to build out a cost model for the strategic plan over time as we're discussing financing it through our budget, so we have some kind of an idea of what those amounts could be.
And I would address that by saying it's the process that when we go to put together each of the fiscal years, each of the budgets, we're building off the strategic plan and those items. So there's not really a cost model that we can put together to say what is the full cost of the strategic plan. We're gonna see it on an annual basis, and that will be subject to review each year as to whether we move forward on an item or don't move forward on an item. And many of the items, as an example, that we've already started to put together or that we've put into play this fiscal year, as far as 16 and a half, have been items that have had either no cost or relatively low cost. It's the, if you want to say the cost impact is staff time to coordinate these projects. At our next Committee of the Whole meeting, Assistant City Manager Patty Hoppenstead is going to be making the first presentation to the City Council on the update, our first update on the strategic plan. So that's how I would answer that question.
And I would say that, reply that staff time is important as far as the budget is concerned. And I truly believe that if this is a budget policy, that there may be no cost items, but for the items that do have a cost, that we give some type of a very broad idea of what we anticipate that to be. That's all.
Mayor, and maybe this question is for the clerk and the city attorney. It would seem to me as a practice that it might behoove us to do the vote of the FAC first, that being the recommendation from the FAC to the city council, and then call the roll of the city council to vote on it after hearing the FAC's recommendation, and that we could use that process going forward if that doesn't violate anything?
No, there are no guidelines on that in the Open Meetings Act for the conduct of the joint meeting. That would be at the discretion of the chair.
Okay. I'll ask for the roll call then, in the order of Finance Advisory Commission and then council.
Tarasinski,
No.
Neely,
Are we voting on to approve these changes to the policies?
Yes.
When can I ask a question of why Mr. Tarasinski has voted no?
It really had to do with the water language, because I don't think we got the change in that we actually discussed. So I'm concerned that it's not going to be there, that we're actually going to make that transfer. So that's why. I think it's going to be the way it is here. That's what I think is being suggested.
We're in the midst of a roll call.
Yes, sorry.
Neely,
Yes.
Verbic,
No.
Conlon,
Yes.
Parch,
Yes.
Petal.
Yes.
That would be 4 yes. Dean, I need a point of clarification. Roll is called, what is the vote that needs to be fulfilled in order to pass on their behalf?
As the joint meetings have been conducted in the past, the roll is taken of the entire joint body, and the vote is
First.
determined based on the outcome of that joint vote.
Together, okay, thank you. Jacobson,
No.
Fanouken,
No.
Markort,
Yes.
Snow,
Yes.
Noriko,
Yes.
Baker, I'm sorry, Favor,
Yes.
Ray,
Yes.
5 yes. So that would be 9 yes total.
And motion carried.
I would ask that, in the spirit of the discussion this evening, that we revisit the budget with respect to the budget policy with respect to the water fund as we move forward in the next budget process, because that,
Question, if I may.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm curious why you didn't take advantage while we were discussing that section to offer or suggest some changes to that language rather than just voting no on it later.
I thought I did during our discussion, offer some suggestions about the changes.
Well,
about-
but you could have then, at that point, made a motion to change it, and rather than just voting no later.
Yeah, I guess I could have.
I mean, that would have made it clear to everybody why you're
Do you
going that
wish to
direction.
do that?
I guess
There-
I,
Can we?
Yeah, there is a way to do this,
Oh,
but do you wish to make an alternative recommendation?
well, the suggestion that I had made about the language in the water fund was that the capital fund retain all of the balance of the operating funds in excess of 25% be transferred to the capital fund. In addition to that, the capital fund would be funded by the 3% of the 4.5% water increase that we had recommended 2 years ago and is currently being in place. And again, the reason for putting that revenue in there discreetly and then all expenditures against the capital fund would be identified in that water capital fund as those projects that were part of the 10-year plan move forward, so that the council would easily have in front of that the revenue stream and the expenditures. If the water fund operationally, it runs a deficit and that it drives its fund balance below 25%, it would be incumbent upon this process then to enlighten the council immediately that the fund balance is below 25% and corrective action should be taken because that fund balance, as far as I know, hasn't been run in deficit for many, many years because it always had a capital component to it. So if it ever came to that, it would be, in my mind, a pretty severe circumstance. That's why I recommend moving those dollars over to the capital fund and using the capital fund as the prime mechanism then to watch your funding and to do all your expenditures and projects.
But now, as
City
I understand,
manager.
Mr. Frieders, having voted in the majority, could I make a motion to reconsider?
Yes.
Okay, I would like to move to reconsider.
Could I entertain the city manager
Sure.
discussion?
My suggestion would be not to vote on this tonight or to have Committee Member Terzinski show language or propose language that we could put in the next packet instead of voting on the fly, that if it is something that you want to amend at the next meeting, and that way it gives both the committee members and the council members the opportunity
All
to
right.
see options on the language.
That's fine.
Okay, that's fine.
Alderman Fanouken, did you have a comment?
well, I just was on the understanding that when we did the 3% for the capital last year, that language was put in place, as that was already a separated definitive fund or fund source for the capital. Is that not true?
That is true.
I think it
Okay.
is.
Thank you.
And I think that's what's reflected in the revenue of the water capital fund.
Correct, but it only generates, maybe about $250,000. So it's not enough to sustain it on its own, the capital plan.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
at this point, we have the financial policies as drafted this evening, as amended, approved. And we can entertain future discussion of further refinements to those. Moving next to the tax levy then. Director Haley.
Okay, so I want to start with the SSAs first, because I think that might be I don't know. Because we haven't really touched on them, there are dollars being requested to be levied for, we have 4 active SSAs. SSA 3, 4, 6, and 14, Heritage Ridge, the Knolls, Greek Row, and Heartland Fields. SSA 14, we're levying the same amount, or recommending to levy the same amount as we did in 2015 at $2,500. SSA 6, we are looking to increase that levy as there was additional lighting that was put into place, so the electric bill, which is what this SSA is meant to cover, has increased. I would add, we are restricted on all 4 SSAs by a rate. We haven't met or come close to hitting that rate in any of them except SSA number 6. We're right about bumping up to the rate limitation, so 14,000 is about all we can levy. The bills running through there is a little closer to 20,000. So the general fund will pick up the remainder. And then the Knolls, we're looking to levy about $500 more, and SSA 3, looking to levy $1,000. Nothing had been levied in the prior, at least two fiscal years. I included this 5-year plan. Director Holdeman and his staff have put together a plan for these SSAs so that it can, look to balance out that fund balance, not build up. We don't want to build up a large fund balance reserve in these SSAs, but in the event we look 5 years down the road and we might need a capital item done, we would have funding there without seeing a bump in or a spike in the tax levy. So I'm sure Director Holdeman would be happy to answer any questions on the expenditure side of this, but it ties directly to the levy as well.
Chair Peddle.
In the interest of full disclosure, I live in SSA number 3. There was a problem with respect to the levy in SSA number 3 that predates the current administration. And I would like that to be brought back up, just so that there was a strategy as to why that levy was zeroed out. The reasoning for the levy was that up until, I want to say, either 2 or 3 years ago, there are approximately 80 houses in SSA number 3. Only approximately 25 to 30 of those houses were paying the SSA tax due to a mistake by the county, and they have been paying that tax for over 20 years. The feeling was that once the county corrected their error, there was no way to get those people their money back. And therefore, and I might add that the citizen who wrote us the letter tonight was one of the houses that paid that levy for the last 20 years. They were paying about triple. And three of the 4 areas in the SSA that are maintained are in that area of the subdivision. But the decision was made by previous administration that for $1,000, that it was best to zero that levy out because it was unfair for those people to continue to pay who had paid for 20-odd years. And, for a $200,000 home, I think it comes out to about $12.50 on the tax bill. And that in terms of equity, $1,000 to the city was very small compared to the goodwill that zeroing that levy out would have. As I said, my bill would go up by about $12.50 by my estimation, maybe more, maybe less. But there was a reason it was zeroed out, and it was not because of the fund balance.
So Mike, what's your suggestion?
Well, I would recuse myself from making a suggestion because my personal taxes would be affected by that suggestion. I'm just explaining why it was zeroed out in the past.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question. So in regards to that, was the issue that the county did not have all the houses that they were not paying for it, or was it the way that the SSA, the boundaries were drawn and was not
No.
inclusive of the entire subdivision?
It was a county error. The appropriate, the SSA was appropriately defined, but the county never picked up the additional parcel numbers, which were appropriately filed. They never picked up the additional parcel numbers and added them to the tax code for more than half the properties.
I could just say is from a administrative perspective, this is something that the city could do that the Public Works Department could coordinate with the Finance Department to make sure that the county includes all of the addresses within
No,
the
they've
subdivision?
already done that.
Okay, but we would verify it prior to moving forward, because I think part of the concern may be, is it still those
No.
20 houses?
That's not the,
Okay.
the concern is that, you know, these people would have paid approximately $750 each into this SSA, okay?
Over the 20 years.
Over the 20 years, you know, roughly. Actually, it probably would be, yeah, right, over the 20 years or so. They would have paid $750 in taxes. And when they should have paid approximately $240 in taxes. Well, at $12.50, you got a long way to go to make those people whole who paid an extra $500 plus interest. And I have never shied away from paying taxes, but I feel that it's important to understand that the zeroing out was not because of the fund balance. It was a deliberate decision on the part of the city because of the error that had been made in the coding of that SSA.
With that information, is there a feeling we need to revisit SSA 3?
I would just say from our perspective, this is a policy decision, that if the reason that special service areas are set up is to provide a funding source for certain areas. So in this case, it's common areas, whether it's maintenance of areas that you're mowing or weed control or landscape maintenance or changing out the maintenance. So the fact is, someone would have to pay for that area. If it is not the residents of that subdivision, then it's the community as a whole, because the city has a responsibility to provide maintenance of those common areas. So fundamentally, it's a question of who's going to pay for that service, whether it's within that subdivision or it's the community as a whole.
Alderwoman Noriko.
Do we have any way of knowing how many the people who originally were paying the extra amount are still there? I mean, there's so much. Admittedly, there probably isn't as much turnover in DeKalb as some other areas, but still, 20 years is a long time.
That subdivision has very little turnover. I'm not as familiar with the front part of the subdivision, but I can tell you that about 80% on my street, 80 to 90%, have been there since I moved in 1998. So there's very little movement. Are there some? Yes, there has been some turnover, no question about that. And the other thing that Mr. Haldeman can confirm is twofold. Number one, the actual expenses this year, it looks like they may be a little higher based on the 16.5. But they have been 400 to 800, maybe reaching 1,000. So the $1,000 has certainly been an upper estimate. But the amount would be significantly higher and may go up because the largest area to be mowed is being mowed by the owner. The largest detention pond area is being mowed by the owner of the property, and therefore, there has been some payback to the city, but I'm starting to advocate here, and I don't want to do that because that is not appropriate.
I was just gonna ask, is, you know, fairness issue, since we have other SSAs, is it fair to zero one out but not do anything to the others? And I understand the concern as to what happened in the past, and I'm not sure how to rectify that. But I'm not sure zeroing it out and saying, okay, that special service area pays nothing, but the other 3 service areas or anything else we establish pays their full share. I'm just curious, is that really a fair way to approach this?
It seems to me there's an issue to be investigated with the county. If in fact this was an error on the county's part of not billing 30 to 40 properties in that SSA, it doesn't seem to me fair to zero out the potential revenues from that SSA and push that burden, basically push that maintenance burden on the entire community.
But Mayor, if you have a discussion with the county, what can the rectification, if you will, what could you do?
They'd have to refund what they
But they can't,
overcharged.
but they can't because they didn't overcharge. And that's what makes
Okay.
this, that's what makes this so difficult, is because the city's levy was for a certain amount of people. The city got that money. So the county collected the correct amount of money. They just didn't disperse the taxes to the right people. So there is no money to be refunded because the city got their whole amount.
Okay.
So this becomes very difficult, and I understand Alderman Snow's point of view, and as I say, I don't oppose paying the taxes that I owe. So that's not an issue.
Okay. Is there further discussion? Alderman, do you have a comment?
I do.
Alderman Faber.
So I don't know about Heritage Ridge, but I do know that the Knowles subdivision was given the option of an HOA, homeowners association. And they chose not to do that. That's why they have the SSA. I live in a subdivision that has a homeowners association, and we maintain all the common areas. But again, same thing with the Knowles. When the Knowles was built, there was not a homeowners association. I believe at the time it was maintained by the developer up until some point in time when it was no longer maintained. Yeah, I think, like you said, this predates the administration and several people. This is something that going forward, when we look at developments, that we make sure that either there is going to be an SSA levied on the subdivision, or there is going to be set up by the developer, a homeowners association going forward. That's what we can do today going forward. I don't have a solution to the problem at Heritage Ridge right now.
City Attorney.
So on that point, Alderman Faber, that's a great point. And prospectively, on development, the recommended practice is to, even if the developer is going to create a homeowners association, to create a backup special service area that remains dormant unless and until the HOA fails to take action.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at the levies right now, SSA 14 for Heartland Fields is an SSA that was created, I want to say about 2 years ago. Heartland Fields was designed as a subdivision that would have an active HOA that would provide the services in that area. And the residents in that area failed to pay into the HOA and didn't have an incentive to keep it operational. And there were maintenance duties that ended up, their detention basin was not being maintained and was not functioning properly. And the city had to take that over and then retroactively create an SSA or go back in and create an SSA in that development. We have other developments in the city that we're facing that very same problem in right now, where the homeowners associations are either defunct or were never properly formed, and periods of long-term neglect of the detention basins are starting to catch up with them. So we certainly, making that distinction at the outset, if it's going to be property owner or homeowners association maintained or city maintained, is critical. But even if it is to be HOA maintained, having the backup special service area there is an invaluable tool. So if you do have an issue, you can simply activate it and have the funds available to ensure that the detention basins that serve the residents are going to be in place.
Mike,
But,
verbiage.
but I think back to Mayor Ray's point, could we go back to the county and say, could we zero out these particular properties for the next 18 years, 20 years, whatever that period was? Is that an option?
I'm assuming these SSAs are levied as ad valorem, they're not levied as a pro rata?
Correct.
So we could explore with the county whether it would be possible to convert to a pro rata levy on these SSAs where you levy by PIN number and assign a different value to each PIN. It's allowable at the time of creation under a special service area. That's something we can investigate to see if it is possible or not. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if that kind of conversion can happen during the term of an active SSA.
The only other thing I would add is you may have had a changeover in people living in the particular houses, even though, as Chair Petal said, that it's relatively stable subdivision, you may now have some people who would not end up paying, or vice versa.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. The other thing that came up, and this is something that really, really frustrates me, because this goes right to the heart of the matter. Apparently, the covenants, which include the HOA, et cetera, and I mean, I signed at the time of closing, they never got filed. Apparently, that's what I've been told by city staff, is that the covenants on the subdivision, which were related to the fact that you had a PUD and you had a special service area, they never got filed, which I'd have to check to see if the SSA was filed. It's just a mess. I mean, if you want to go forward, the easiest way is to just do the $1,000, and allocate that across the entire subdivision. But it's one of these things that when you see people that are frustrated with respect to this particular SSA, due to no fault of the city in terms of the levy, actually I should say the extension, you'll understand where that's coming from. And also, I think it is a reasonable request for any SSA that we keep very good records of exactly what is being spent, and so that if a resident asks, we can respond in the way that Mr. Holdeman has tried to respond.
Ron, Parch?
It just seems we don't really have good records and we don't know. I'd be curious if more than half, we talk about how many people are still there. Is it more than half or is it less than half? 20 years is a long time. I know a lot of people that have moved out of there, but I know a lot of people that have been there since they built that. Certainly the real estate county records ought to be able to tell us the turnover. Maybe a simple solution is if more than half have moved, you know what I mean? It's I can tell you if I lived in one of these other SSAs and found out somebody that bought a house that I had looked at and was paying nothing, I'd probably not feel that was unfair. I hear what Mr. Petal's saying, and it's not a good situation. Something should have been done 20 years ago whenever this happened. Do we have copies of when this agreement was set up and why? I'd be curious to read it and see what is in that, because right now we're just going on a memory here, right?
So I'm not certain with respect to this specific development, the history of how or when the SSA was created, if it was created at the time of the approval of the subdivision. I believe that was the case, but I can't tell you with certainty. But the process of creating them, there is essentially the municipality adopts a ordinance indicating we intend on creating an SSA. And here's the legal description, here's a list of all the pins in it, here's a map showing it, here's the maximum rate that we would ever levy at. And here's the list of permitted purposes that we would use funds generated by the SSA for. Then there is a published notice. There's a notice that's mailed to each of the property owners of record of every PIN in the SSA. There is a second ordinance that's brought forward that creates the SSA. And at that point in time, at the time of creation, if 51% of the property owners file a petition opposing the SSA, it prevents it from being created. So it cannot be, that property owner veto cannot be overridden at the time of creation.
But that's extremely misleading, because the way that SSAs generally are done is that the only owner of the property is the developer. So the developer has 100% of the votes. So people come in and they don't even know that they're in an SSA in many cases. I did a seminar on SSAs up in Crystal Lake, and one of the people on the panel was a land use attorney from Zukowski, Rogers, Flood and McCardle, a top local government firm. She couldn't find the SSA when she did the search for her property when she bought it, and it was in an SSA. So there's been a lot of controversies, not in DeKalb, about the disclosure with respect to SSAs.
Alderman Jacobson.
Couple questions, looking at it, obviously switching gears a little bit out of the Greek Row SSA. Obviously, as that falls in my ward, I'm a little more knowledgeable and comfortable with that one over the Heritage Ridge one. In terms of the expenses this year, why did they jump so high year over year?
There were, I think it was right when I started, there was new lighting put out in that area, so it's really, this just covers the electric bill for that lighting, it's my understanding. So it was almost a double cost increase.
And the electricity costs, or obviously we had to pay for those installations and those light rentals and those things too, correct?
And I believe that was in fiscal 15. Some of it may have fallen into fiscal 16, but 15 and 16.
Again, knowing what it was before that lighting upgrade, at about $6,000 or $7,000 a year, we only added 30 lights of the probably 100 that are out there. So assuming it would be a 30% increase, I think that's what we talked about at the time, for it to jump 130 or 140%, and then this year, why was there zero expenses showing this year on the chart here?
We're estimating zero expenses because the fund balance is going negative, but I'm assuming that we'll have some expenses hit there. So we are limited in this SSA as part of the restriction. So we are almost at the top, hitting that rate for this levy. So we can only levy so many dollars. And then the general fund would.
The parcels that's in that one.
I know Tim is working with our GIS tech right now, so.
So if I could, prior to 2016, we were averaging around $10,000 for lighting. 2015, it was $14,000, and then in 2016, it's almost $22,000. A significant portion of that, $22,000, is repair and adding new lights, and so it's a best estimate going forward for the the 14,000.
And is that amount being billed, is that all the electricity being consumed by those lights, or just by the additional ones that went into the upgrade program?
I believe it's all of them together.
All of them?
Yeah.
Like, again, nobody else in town pays for their streetlights. Greek Row is being forced, the owners of Greek Row are being forced to pay for all of their lighting out there. And I think that has to be looked into for certain. I also believe that in the letter that was shared during comments, I would agree with the resident that if the downtown is receiving a special service, and they are, as a significant benefit at tens of thousands of dollars to the rest of the community, that they too should have to pay for that service. And if you're gonna make the argument that they don't need to, then none of these SSAs, especially in terms of lightings, may have merit. You can't tell one area of the community, well, you have to pay for a special service, when other areas of the community that are taking much more don't. That's my theory.
Is there further discussion on the SSAs?
Quick question. Could homeowners, such as Heritage Ridge, organize an HOA and then the SSA is put on the shelf as Dean Frieders mentioned, can it go that way as well as the way you described, where an SSA sits dormant and then becomes active?
So, yes, if there was no longer a need to levy funds, the city could do what it did with that SSA for a number of years and just have a zero levy. And the SSA would be dormant and could be reactivated if there was ever a need. The only challenge in that is if it is public land that is the subject of the maintenance here, if these detention basins, for example, are, if they were deeded to the public or if they were conveyed to the city through the plat, there would be some liability concerns we would want to evaluate as far as ensuring that the detention was properly being maintained so it didn't flood and cause property damage issues that could potentially be a city liability, or ensure that, you know, the mechanism by which it's being maintained is appropriate and that someone doesn't become injured. But in answer to your narrow question, yes, you can just simply zero levy.
And an HOA could be formed and come forward and just take care of it themselves, provided they deal with these other issues you were talking about.
Yes. The property owners could work together and create a homeowners association and record it against their collective properties and utilize that as a mechanism for addressing issues in their neighborhood.
It could be downtown businesses for snow removal, or any of those are possible then, is that right?
I'm not certain that I've seen something like that done with a downtown business like Property Owners Association. It is certainly more common in the residential realm, or you see that from time to time in strip centers that have property owners associations, or they either utilize property owners associations or common area maintenance funds. But it is definitely possible in the homeowners context.
Okay.
Mayor, if I could?
Yes.
I did want to go back to the Greek Row SSA and clarify that it's with respect to the maintenance of the parking lot lighting on private property and the associated utility costs. So it's not all of the lights, it's only the lights that are illuminating private property. And we're in the midst of reevaluating all of the Greek properties in that area to make sure that they're all within the SSA.
Alderman Jacobson.
Is that the entire definition of the SSA? I mean, if that's the case, we have a major problem. Because again, I remember that program, I think it was back in 11 or 12, that they did that, obviously, before most of us were in the room, certainly before I was here, it was just before my time. And they did come to many of the owners asking if we would put street lighting up. And if that was the intent of it, obviously, we're now paying for significant street lighting through this SSA, either some or all of it. And then, is that even within the bounds of the SSA, if that's the case, if the definition was for private property street lighting and now it's gone to public lighting?
Without knowing so again, when you form the SSA, there'd be defining language about what the permitted purposes would be. And expenditures have to be within the permitted purposes of the establishing ordinance.
Again, being that that may have been one of the defining characteristics, I think we should probably look into that.
We definitely will. It's likely that the lighting is, the number of lights that make up the bill that is charged to the SSA is well-defined and has been historically constant. But we'll delve into that in a little bit more detail.
Okay. Is there further discussion on the SSAs? Kathy, if there isn't, do you want to move on to the other parts of the tax levy?
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Was there ever a resolution to the issue of the Heritage Ridge SSA about what to do?
No.
No, okay.
So, well, it's sitting in the tax levy at this recommendation of $1,000.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy Haley.
So based on some questions I had received in conversations in our previous meetings, I put together 3 different options of the tax levy. The first option is the original option that was presented by staff with the budget, fully funding both police and fire pension funds, and increasing the property tax by that full amount. So you'll see 3 examples in your packet, what that impact is on the rate based on an increased EAV and also on an individual homeowner. Just down and dirty numbers, no homestead exemptions included. And that keeps the fund balance in sync at 25%. The second option is to hold the rate at the same rate as 2015 tax levy, which would still allow the city to capture $462,000 in additional revenue. Our recommendation, if that was going to be the option, would be to decrease IMRF slightly and Social Security completely, so that the property tax is still a 1-for-1 revenue to expenditure to the police and fire pension tax levies, as has been recommended by Moody's. And then option 3 would be to completely deplete IMRF and FICA and only use the tax levy to fund the police and fire pension fund actuarial evaluations. And showing that increase is about, $389,782. You can see the impact on the rate. The rate would go down slightly because the EAV is going up. All estimations, that's an estimated EAV, so. I also included a sheet, just option 1, 2, and 3, so you can see the scenarios, the impact on an average homeowner, what the general fund balance impact would be for each of those options, so.
Is there a discussion on the tax levy? Yeah. Alderman Fanouken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have the policy of having the fund balance at 25%, and the general fund, both option 2 and option 3, I think stay within the spirit of that. I'm sorry, I thought I was. Stay within the spirit of that, being within a percent and a third of that 25% fund balance. We know that homeowners are being hit hard with property taxes. And therefore, at this point, because there's not a significant difference, I'd still like to, I would prefer option 3 to at least discuss that as our jumping off point. That would reduce the rate to 1.1799 and an overall increase of 4.94%. So that just is a jumping off point for discussion this evening.
Okay. Other comments? Mike Verbeek.
And I like 3 because we're, looking at police and fire pensions in particular. And I think that that's certainly the deficit we need to strive toward in the coming years.
Other, Chair Peddle.
I know that I'm not going to be a popular person, but I have to disagree with my colleagues. You have a levy policy that says as your first priority that you will fully fund all of your pension obligations. Options 2 and 3 ignore your pension obligations. It is a very, very, very difficult decision. And you're playing a shell game if you choose option 2 or 3, because you still got to fund that money out of city funds. And you're going to do it in a less than transparent way. I don't like a 10.8% increase in the levy any more than any other taxpayer likes it. But in my opinion, That's what your pension obligations are. This is not something you have chosen. As we've pointed out, much of the pension liability, the lion's share being police and fire, is the failure of councils in the past to bite the bullet and to collect enough in the property tax levy. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry. Failing to fully fund the pensions would also be cowardly. That said, I could live with option number 2, but option number 3 doesn't meet your fiduciary responsibility as members of the city council.
Other comments? Alderman Jacobson.
Just for argument's sake, I would like to have that discussion as well. I agree to a point with Chair Peddle. On the first page of the handout that was given out today, the property taxes general fund, obviously that corporate line item has gone up significantly from 0 to the 800,000. Where is that being allocated to?
That's 100% being allocated to the police and fire pension funds. So the revenue going in is corporate, fire pension, police pension. The expenditure going out is police pension, fire pension. It was part of the tax levy packet that I'd be happy to send that to you, but it's a 1-for-1 for police and
Why
fire.
hasn't that been included? I mean, is that our back obligation? Why is that, or that's just the new actuarial?
The 824?
Correct.
So last year, if you recall, the tax levy had a factor into it for House Bill or Senate Bill 318,
Which still
potential
may.
property tax freeze, which is not on the table any longer, but potential for home rule communities to have a freeze on our aggregate property tax dollars. We didn't have really any aggregate property tax dollars because we had nothing in our corporate bucket. So in order to not tie our hands in the event this property tax freeze took place, we said, okay, well, let's put money in that corporate bucket, but we still will dedicate it to police and fire pension. So that was our logic behind that. We're continuing to keep that dedicated to police and fire pension. The property tax freeze is not necessarily on the table, but there still isn't a budget, and who knows what might happen, but.
Especially there is still some sentiment to force people to cut local property taxes. And basically, what's happening there is if that legislation were to go through, our ability to ever levy for corporate purposes could potentially go away. So it's a placeholder. It's still police and fire levy. It's just in terms of the purpose of the levy, but it's a placeholder so that we would not get zeroed out in the future should we ever need for any purpose, whether it's debt or anything else, to levy for something other than police and fire pension.
Going back to Chair Peddle's comment, I think there's been a discussion I've had with several people recently, including one of our union people, frustrated at obviously the funding levels of our pensions. And at least in my understanding, at least since I've been here, we have fully funded the share that based on the method we were using, but we were fully funding those amounts at least as far back as 11. So at what point between 96, 97, when they were 96 or 97% funded, and 2011, or 10-ish, did we not fund those at the full rate we should have?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
You haven't ever funded them at the rate. Never, Dave. And the reason.
Based on the way you calculate it.
Based on, what we did is we used our own actuary to reduce our pension contribution. If we had used the recommended amount from the state, we would have been contributing more. So we have never contributed at the level that would be necessary using more conservative actuarial recommendations. But of course, then there also was the huge drop in the assets of all the pension programs.
Again, I think that was my discussion was, while other municipalities and other governmental agencies have certainly unfunded them or borrowed from those funds, we at the city have never done that. We've always used our tax levy to put them in. Again, while you agree with the actuarials, which I don't, of course, or while you agree with the funding method, it wasn't that we weren't meeting that legal obligation. We were funding the pensions.
You weren't meeting your moral obligation, though. Sorry.
Again, the state was giving us a number and we were meeting that number.
No,
So-
you weren't. That's the whole point, Dave. The state was giving you a number, and then we went to an independent actuary to get a lower number, which we're entitled to do. The recommended state contribution was higher.
Again, the reality looking in the last 20 years, that even if we had doubled those contributions, we'd still be 30 or 40 million unfunded, shows a fundamental issue. Again, not with funding, it's with the system. It's with the pension system. Provided we doubled our amount all those years, and you're adding another 4 million to the system each year for 20 years, that still doesn't get us up to even at this point, especially with the returns we have. So again, what we can, every few years, a different group comes in, obviously here and in all of our seats. Every couple of years, we're getting a different answer of how to correctly and appropriately fund them. The reality is every year we're slipping further and further into a hole because the cause of the issue is the system. And I think that's part of the issue, especially in budgeting that I've had up on council, is I'm not entirely sure, even after sitting here as long, and I'm all but positive, all but one or two people on council are probably in the same boat. What are the typical pension responsibilities? If we hired a new employee today, how does it change those actuarial numbers? How does it change our contribution level per employee? Is it 20,000 a year? Is it 30,000 a year? That our obligation then goes up. And I don't know if we've ever had that discussion.
Well, and I think that's a great question for Jason from Foster and Foster. When he was here, there is an actuarial dollar amount that you can pinpoint per employee, and it's in his report. And I'm sorry, I don't know it off the top of my head. But it's a combination. Sometimes as we add new employees, they're younger, they're tier 2, they're actually contributing higher now of their own salaries. It could have a positive impact on that valuation, but it's hard to tell what the full impact would be.
See, if you hire a new employee, the only thing that employee is going to come in with is normal pension costs, or your annual liability. So, if on a new employee, if you pay just what you owe each year in terms of your contributions, then you shouldn't be adding to your overall liability as being caused by hiring another employee, meaning that should be fully funded just because we've been funding the normal cost all the way along. It doesn't add to the accumulated cost because it's a new employee who wouldn't have any claim against us for past pension obligations that we hadn't yet met. Right, shortfalls.
Alderwoman Narenko.
Unfortunately, once again, we're facing a situation in which we have to face up to issues that have been deferred. The pension payments, and whether it's a system issue or a calculation issue, we still have these numbers to deal with and these unfunded liabilities. And I think accepting option 3, while we would continue to fully fund police and fire, fails to recognize our other pension liabilities adequately. And I recognize the political realities, frankly, of option number one. So, I hate to, sound kind of wishy-washy, but in some ways that's how I feel, saying option number two, it at least begins to acknowledge or sends hopefully some kind of message that these liabilities have to be recognized. And I think that has been a very, very difficult message to get out, to the community. And I mean, the reasons that the numbers jumped, the mortality table changing and all of that, all of these issues are complex, and it's taken us how many meetings? And we're trying to explain this as part of, the tax levy that's complex. It's a tough sell, regardless of which option. But I think, in terms of sending a message and something that I think many of us could at least reasonably accept, I say option two.
Alderman Snow.
I'm also in favor of option two. I think at least it captures the new construction in DeKalb, the new housing. There's not much of that, but there's some. So if your equalized assessed valuation hasn't changed, then your dollar amount's going to not change, but it will change for those whose assessed valuation has changed or new construction. Obviously, we have to fully fund what we feel is the complete pension, and IMRF and Social Security has never been fully funded out of property taxes anyway, so we're going to have to supplement that with the general fund. But I think it is an appropriate amount. It keeps the rate the same, but captures a few new dollars for that new equalized assessed valuation.
Alderman Finucane.
Well, actually, both 2 and 3 do capture some of those new dollars, and the total dollar difference in the overall levy is only $72,000 difference between 2 and 3. I mean, that's the only difference we're looking at. We're not talking about the 400,000 going down from option 1 to option 2. We're only talking about an additional $72,000. And I think I can speak with what I'm hearing from homeowners. They'd like to see no increase at all in a percentage. And if we can minimize that as much as possible, I think that if we're gonna cut into the general fund balance and all, an extra 0.18% is not gonna make that much of a difference in the general fund.
Again, my support of option 3 does not mean that I don't support all pensions. I certainly do. My point is that we need to start looking to reduce other expenditures to be able to maintain operations at the city.
And obviously, Mike, I'm not suggesting we don't meet our full pension
Right.
obligations. Again,
Right.
we need to look at where else that we can reduce some of our expenditures along the way.
Exactly, right.
Mike.
Couple of questions. The numbers that are down here under the public safety pension levies, are those hard numbers that we have already set, so that, by my calculations, if we're looking at the corporate plus the fire pension, police pension, those dollar amounts right there comes to about $5.5 million, just below that. Is that a hard expense? Is that a known expense?
That
Is
is
that
the
what-
actual actuarial dollar amounts, one for one, yes.
That we are going, this is what is due in 2017?
Yes.
Due to be
fiscal-
paid in
yeah,
2017?
Yes.
To be paid off of the 2016 tax
Correct,
bill?
correct.
That we will collect and then, okay, just for my clarification, do we make that all as in one lump sum payment, or do we make that payments, blah, blah? What's our practice on that?
When we receive the income tax portion for police and fire, they receive it, so.
We immediately turn around, and so the two tax bills, we get our first installment from the county.
For the most part,
We
yes.
immediately write a check to the fire pension and the police pension.
Right.
Type of thing. Okay. So, we know that is our hard number there. We also bill out for various other things, correct? For reimbursement. And I know sometimes, you know, like when we supply services to other organizations, we bill them, right? We have contracts with other organizations.
We do have some charges for services. They are
Okay.
not restricted revenue. You know, the city receives a lot of different revenues. Some revenue is restrictive. MFT money, very restricted, specifically for state legislation. Those dollars have gone into the general fund for general operations and activities and are not restricted dollar amounts, so.
Okay, so when we provide fire ambulance service for NIU, for the high school, for so on and so forth, we get reimbursed for that, right? We have
Yes,
contracts
We
for
do have a
that.
contract, yes.
Okay, is that a large dollar amount?
Probably about $100,000 for both the contracts that we currently have.
Okay.
This is for special events, that's not including the large fire contract we have.
But we have a large fire contract as well?
We have a large fire contract with Northern Illinois University. It supplies contractual fire and EMS services to them,
Okay.
which I don't believe is counted in that figure.
Okay.
That goes back to salary though, doesn't it?
I'm not sure what Kathy.
7G is a one-for-one, isn't it?
No, this is the actual fire contract.
So does that provide that's just like, for the next 12 months, you have a fire or something, or an ambulance call, we come and do something?
That's
Or
correct.
we provide a service, we don't come and do something, we don't point at somebody and say, oh, you fell and hit your head, but, I mean, we provide the service, right?
Correct. Day-to-day operations.
Okay. So I guess kind of what I'm getting at, in a long-about way, is that while I totally understand that option 3 doesn't totally cover maybe what you think, you know, it does cover that bill that's coming due there. We do receive money that theoretically in a different world, like Caterpillar or somewhere else that was more cost accounting, a portion of that would be considered to cover labor, i.e. holiday pay, insurance, pensions. So I'm for option 3, or even a new option where, you know, we don't increase it at all. As a homeowner, I would be for that. I totally understand that we have to increase it so that we can go up, but I don't think we need to. Last year, we went all the way up. So I guess I'm going for option 4 because we receive monies for this in other ways.
So I would just want to jump in. One, the revenue that you're talking about is general fund revenue. It is not dedicated revenue, and it covers all operations of the $13 million and the $10 million budgets that doesn't come close to covering their budgets.
Correct.
So if you're going to be taking away that to cover, that, you know, has been meant to cover for general operations in the past, you know, you're taking out one hole to fill another hole. I would also state that Moody's has been very, very clear on a one-for-one dedicated revenue source. This is a known revenue to a known expenditure, and they have come down really hard on pension liabilities to municipalities in the state of Illinois. And I'm not saying part of it's not the state's ignorance for creating that PUC method, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, they downgraded our bond rating. They will be looking at us again next year. I'm not sure if it'll get downgraded again next year. You know, we run that risk, I guess.
Alderman Jacobson.
That's just the way I feel.
This is it. This is what governments before us were forced to do. I mean, it's amazing. We just went and said, You know, the problems we have are because of the government's before us, and now we're having the same discussion, whether it's not fund pensions or drawdown savings. When we finally got to our 25% target, that was a priority of the city, now it's not that important anymore, it's not a priority anymore, because we gotta come up with some money. This will probably stun a lot of people. Again, I don't think we're fairly even truthfully showing the obligations we should. Not only do I think option one is the reality that we face, but it should be significantly higher. If we're going to truly meet the letter of intent of our policy, all of IMRF and all of Social Security should be in this tax levy too. And then when we change the actuaries, you're adding another probably 20 or 25% next year, on top of the increase from last year, on top of the increase from this year. The reality is, by having these discussions and confusing the focus and the goal and the moving target, we refuse to reform the system. So this year it'll be drop the fund balance down. Because again, we have to be beholden to the residents. The reality is, instead of reforming the system, we just keep robbing from one fund to the next and moving the money around in circles. And rather than have the real discussion again and deal with the causes, we're gonna be bogged down in issues that take us away from the focus of where we should be talking. The reality is, even option one isn't enough to meet our policy, to meet the stated policy that we've all agreed is the right way to run the city.
So Dave, you're speaking in favor of option one?
Again, I don't think option one's enough,
Okay.
unfortunately. If we're, again, our focus and our goal was 25% fund balance. And we've already seen the projections where just the sheer fact of the budget increasing is already going to drop that down. Now we're talking about reducing 1.25%, 1.5%. At what point do policies matter? At what point do you set a policy and force yourselves to complete that policy? If they don't matter, why bother sitting here for 4 hours a meeting and having all these discussions and wasting my time and wasting your time and wasting all these experts' time in the room if we're not gonna bother to even a year or two later follow those policies?
Okay. So Dave, you're speaking in favor of option one, which Kathy is incorporated in the draft budget.
I'm saying levy all under our policy. And it's gonna show a 30% increase this year, which obviously we've already passed the ceiling, which is gonna be difficult to do, not because I'd ever in any
You can't.
fathomable reality vote for that. We've already set our ceiling.
Isn't option one the ceiling?
It is.
Yeah.
Correct, but that doesn't include all of the liabilities we have under our
Correct.
policy either.
Right, but we can't change it.
Again, rather than force the discussion by doing it the correct way, by following the policy that we've set, that our auditors have said they wanna see, and our bond rating wants to see, and best practice in the industry wants to see, we've intentionally now clouded the argument and half committed, we're half pregnant at this point, in terms of what we have to do. If a resident realized that we need to go up 30 or 35%, they're gonna be pounding on this door forcing change. And until you step up to the plate and do what's right, and do what you need to do, and lead as leaders of this community, nothing's gonna change. We're gonna have this discussion every year, the balance is gonna continue to dip, we're not gonna fund pensions, we're not gonna fund roads, because you don't have the heart or the stones to step up and say, let's get it done.
All of them in favor?
So, the 854, that is that's the actuarial and per pension funding requirement that we're required to increase, correct? That's our shortfall.
The 854 is the full funding for police and fire pension through the levy, and that's the only increase to the levy, yes.
Right. And
In that.
I've mentioned this before, and I would like to, I mean, we should be funding that. That's our obligation, that's our liability, we should be funding that. I would really like to have a discussion about reducing non-core services $854,000. And then, what are those non-core services? We'll have to talk, because I don't know. I don't want to take anything out of roads, but, you know, it was thrown out, or it was discussed earlier. Crossing guards potentially is a non-core service. That may be $100,000. We talked about the tree program. I don't know, that's already been taken out, so that's not on the table for anything else. But there was discussion about potentially not collecting leaves in the fall. That may be a non-core service. So I would like to talk about non-core services that can be reduced by $854,000.
If I could just jump in there, the challenge that we face and why we're recommending the priority-based budgeting is it's hard for us to cost out all of our services right now. I think what has been done in the past when there's been reductions is it's been looked at in terms of people and not necessarily service. By switching to a priority-based system, which is what we're recommending, priority-based budgeting, we'd be able to identify every single service that we provide in the city, the cost of all those services, and then prioritize those into quartiles. So if we are to do that this year, we're not gonna be able to cost them out to the level that if we switch to priority-based budgeting.
And I understand that. And we're talking about budgeting that in for next year and doing that next year. I think this would be a step in the right direction. We may not be 100% directionally correct, but it's a discussion that I have not seen held publicly yet. So I don't know what our non-core services are. I mean, so there's a lot of things the city does, and I want to fund the pensions. I want to take care of those people who are protecting us. That's something we should do. I want to have our roads nice, our bridges not falling. Beyond that, we could discuss, I think, everything else.
So Tony, you're speaking to option one of the tax levy?
A modified option one to reduce, I would like to fully fund the pension contribution as stated in option one. I would like to hold the levy rate constant, if possible, through non-core service reduction. Which is option?
So that's option 2, holding the rate the same.
Option 2, but keeping the fund balance at 25%. Right.
Oh, so
And
it's a
keeping the fund
combination.
balance at
Got it.
25%. And I'm not expecting that we would get 100% of the 854. It's possible, again, that's why I'm saying I'd like to fully fund the pension contribution, keep the fund balance at 25%, and then reduce the rate as much as we possibly could.
So can I just restate it? So you're saying option 2, but keeping the fund balance at 25%?
It's really a new option, let's say,
Yeah.
hold the rate and keep the fund balance at 25%, is that correct?
I was saying, to me, it was more Alderman Markwart's option 4.
Okay. Tom Tarazinski?
Thank you. I think it's really come full circle, and maybe that's the point of some of the aldermen's point, is you can't take this in isolation as a separate item without considering the budget, and we haven't made budget recommendations yet. So right now, the budget sits at a $400,000 or $500,000 surplus, and that has some risk to it that I hope we get to in the next 2 hours of conversation, because I think there's severe risk, some risk that needs to be at least brought out. Some might consider it a concern, maybe others don't. I do. So as you discuss this point, and I think the points are very valid, that if you want to fund it fully at the $854,000 and make all of that up in cost reduction, that to me is a consistent conversation, at least on looking at a holistic impact. Conversely, if you're not willing to make those reductions and only get to a partial reduction, maybe your option 2 is a valid point, but I think that's the right way to start to look at this, is holistically. As it relates to other services that go to pay for pensions, IMRF, and FICA, I have noted at least 3 times in conversations that there are other revenue streams besides property taxes that in fact do and are intended to cover some of those costs. So I think there are costs being collected other than pure property tax to pay for MIRF and FICA. And we've talked about payment in lieu of taxes that the water department is paying back to the city to the tune of $316,000. That's property tax in lieu of payment that the water system doesn't get taxed on. So that's really revenue that comes to the general fund that, in my opinion, is largely related to property tax and therefore would be an offset, as is the TIF property tax surplus. It is property tax, that's surplus, that's brought back. That's brought back down as a transfer or other revenue someplace. It's not put in this schedule. That's why I mentioned it the other day when we talked about the policy aspects. There's $400,000, $500,000, $600,000. It's more than adequate to cover, in theory, the discussion of IMRF and Social Security. I realize that becomes a theoretical question when you're talking about real dollars and having now to cut $400,000 or $500,000 or $800,000, depending on how serious you get about that. But, so those are 2 points. But as we discuss about the budget considerations, I think there are some potential discussions there that offer some risks in addition to this.
Mayor?
Yes. Alderwoman Noriko.
I have a kind of a process question, whether even getting into a discussion of the budget, how feasible is it to think that we will be able, we being certainly, you know, I don't know if the council members are prepared or have the background to propose significant dollar reductions. I don't know if the city staff is really prepared to do that. The budget, the information I've gotten from them is that when this budget was being prepared, the numbers, you know, did get pared down. So they're going to, you know, if we say go back and find $500,000 or $800,000, it's going to take some serious digging on their part, digging that I don't think we can do just sitting here, unless I'm wrong. I mean,
Well, I think you have a valid point, Kate, that the draft budget that is in front of us tonight, presented on October 10th, as was related in 2 previous meetings when the budgeting process was reviewed, that entailed months of activity that were within the policy that council had approved and defined for staff. So staff had done their task in developing this draft budget, which is in front of us. I think the opportunity lies in revisiting those policies and giving that further direction to staff, which in my mind is beyond FY17. Or if we see revenue adjustments, City Manager Gora, Finance Director Haley have related that they watched the revenue streams on a monthly basis. If into first quarter, into 6 months of FY17, if we see revenue adjustments needed, we'll have to face that occurrence at that time. So I would encourage us to not dismiss this draft budget in hand. But I think you raise a valid point, Kate, that for staff to go back and rework that budget is going to take significant time and effort. And I'm to do an adequate job with that. I don't think it's just tweaking an individual line item. Alderman Jacobson.
I can't believe how unbelievably frustrating that last string of comments was. In 15, we said, let's look at it in 16. In 16, we said, let's look at it in 16.5. In 16.5, we're saying, let's look at it in 18. When are we gonna stand up and be leaders here? At what point do we as a council direct the staff that status quo isn't going to work anymore? And last year, you didn't offer an opportunity for that.
Alderman Jacobson, we heard Alderman Faber speaking to the priority-based budgeting that City Manager Gora.
To turn around and say that at this point, John, that it's just, there's nothing else we can do. This is why we have a finance advisory committee. This is why we have these meetings. Not to have, oh, woe is us sessions and see how different departments need more money to maintain status quo. The entire purpose of these meetings is to go through the budget line item by line item and have these discussions and have the discussions of where cuts need to be made or where services may need to go at this point. And every year we put that process off to maintain status quo. And we have council members that don't believe that they are even competent to do this job. They don't believe that they have the ability to be a check on the staff that's writing the budget. So our Finance Advisory Committee isn't participating in any substantive discussions. Our council isn't competent enough to have those discussions as they continue to demonstrate by their comments over and over and over again when we discuss these budgets. And nobody's saying, hey, we need staff to go take another whack at this. Not only are we not saying that, we're saying the opposite. We're saying it's not their responsibility. They've already done that for us. They've already done that to maintain status quo.
David, my point is, this draft budget has been in front of us since October 10th. We come in a month later and start tweaking line items in the budget and feel that's an adequate process.
Again, it should have been, as I said last budget time and the time before that you as the mayor should have took the lead in that process. You failed to do so. You have left us in the situation we're in, and that's unfortunate. But that doesn't mitigate our responsibility to do our jobs. We should have had that discussion at the very first council meeting, or at the very first budget meeting, rather than having presentations of policies and things. If you don't know that as a council member, you are not doing your job correctly, period. And that's any of us sitting here. If you don't yet understand the budget, reach out to our staff and have meetings with them privately. To sit here and go over policy and those things, we need to have discussion time. We need to have substantive, hands-on leadership time to make these decisions. And every year, we say at this time, oh, well, there's nothing we can do because we gotta pass it next month. And that's been every single year I've sat in this chair. And it's not just John, I apologize for attacking you on that because it goes before you. And it goes to staff before it's staff that's in the room. The reality is, there are difficult, very difficult discussions that need to be had.
There are.
And very much change to how we do business here.
And
But
Dave,
continuing to kick that can down the road and saying, well, everybody gave their wish list and we cut their wish list in half, but they still get to keep what they had last year. When you are in a stagnated budget time, when your revenues are not increasing and your costs are, there has to be a give somewhere.
okay. And I would offer, Dave, that those individual conversations between council members and staff have been occurring. I've seen communication going on. I've had statuses with City Manager Gora that assure me that those individual conversations, people have questioned line items. I had a list of half a dozen line items that Kathy addressed a month ago for me.
After the budget was already submitted. You can't have a substantive discussion once the document's already done. You can't,
Well,
you
it's
can't
not
discuss what
approved at that
ingredients are
point.
going into the soup when they put the soup in a bowl in front of you,
City
John.
Manager.
That's what I'm telling you.
I just want to address Alderman Jacobson's point, is that we've heard the concerns of council, which is one of the reasons that we're recommending the priority-based budgeting, is switching to that. Because it's very similar to what NIU has done to a certain extent, of looking at and identifying every single service that we provide to this community and costing out every one of those services, and then putting each of those services in quartiles from core to non-core, and then making, if the council wants to reduce expenditures, you then have the data and the information to look at that. But then the other flip side of the coin is then you also have the information to know how much it is to provide that service, and then you have the decision to say, are you gonna fund that service or you're not gonna fund that service? The challenge that we face now, and I can tell you firsthand, is seeing the reductions that were made in 2010 and how we've been trying to continue to provide services to the community based on what the services, what the level of services were. Now, if that is not a consistent argument, or if the council were to say, no, we want to decrease the level of service, then we would look at that to address what Alderman Favor had said. If there is a reduction, and if that is the direction that the committee and the council wants to go, it will impact the level of services, because the purpose of the presentations, in particular at the last meeting, was for you to hear, especially from the big three departments, our largest three departments, how they're trying to balance in providing service to the community in a challenging environment. You've heard the fire chief talk about how, yes, there may be additional firefighters, but he is providing that level of services with less going towards commodities. So we will go with whatever direction that is given to us. It will impact services. I'm just gonna speak one other second from the council manager form of government. Is my understanding, what I've been taught, what I have seen in other communities, and what I've been doing for 25 years, you identify the policy, you identify the high level where you want us to be. As staff, we will figure out how to make that happen. So if you say we want to reduce expenditures by X, we're going to come back to you with the recommendations on how to reduce those expenditures by X.
Alderwoman Noriko.
I've struggled with how to respond to these comments. And first of all, I'd like to say that, yes, when I had questions, I did go to staff. I spent over an hour sitting with Kathy Haley, individually going over issues. And I don't think that it advances or assists reasonable discussion to question the competence or commitment of other council members or anyone else sitting here who has given up significant time. Having said that, having gotten that off my chest, I still believe that it would be unfortunate and imprudent for us to expect staff to sit here right now and come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars of reductions in expenses. And I'm willing to step forward and say, I am not competent to go to the fire chief and say, I think equipment should be cut by this much. Or to go to Chief Lowry and say, figure out a way to do this training by cutting 10,000. Or when I looked at the line item for salt in the Public Works budget. Seems like a lot of money to me, but I don't know how you project for what the winter is going to be like or what salt costs are. At a certain point, unless I'm going to devote my whole life to questioning each item and each activity in each department each day, I have got to depend upon other people. And I think that is the basis of how we work together. And I'm far more willing to work together than to attack what other people of goodwill, intelligence, commitment, and knowledge are doing.
Mike, Burbank?
And that's a great point to Mr. Favor's idea, though, is it would be council instructing city manager to say, please bring us back $850,000 you should not get involved with what that is. That's what you have them for, is you say an amount and you ask them to bring that back. But it gets to the core issue of year to year, this year, I believe expenses increased over 9% and revenues increased at just over 2%-ish. So we have a gap there year to year that, how do we get to that? And I think some of these comments that have been placed start to get to that, but it does have to start somewhere.
And I would just address, I think it gets to the pensions when you talk about the amount, and it's a fundamental issue or policy or philosophy of the committee and the council, is when you see those pension increases, are you gonna match the revenue for that? Or if you're not gonna do that, are you gonna reduce expenditures to make up that gap, or are you gonna have something in between the two?
Chair Bennell.
Mayor, I think we're spinning our wheels here. And I would suggest that it is time to bite the bullet, whatever that bullet ends up being, and decide on the tax levy. We've heard what people's concerns are with respect to coming back with something with respect to cuts in the budget. We're going to have time to do that, hopefully, as soon as we pass a levy. If in your mind that levy is dependent, as Alderman Favor has suggested, on an $850,000 cut in whatever is defined as non-core expenditures, then bring that up and vote on it in the budget discussion. Right now, we're in the levy discussion, and we have quite correctly linked up some issues in the budget with that. But I think it's time for us to finish the levy discussion and make a choice as to what direction we're going to go with respect to the levy.
Alderman Jacobs.
I appreciate those comments. However, I think we're putting the cart before the horse. Before you have the general fund and the budget discussion, you can't pass a levy. Otherwise, you are literally, you're in the dark at that point. If you take one of these other options, the only reality at that point is that you're changing our savings. You're drawing it on the savings. And before you have this discussion, we need to have the budget discussion. I agree, we're spinning our wheels. And we need to move on to that discussion, and it's a long discussion. I firmly believe, again, that to have the understanding of where this number needs to be, we have to have a grasp and understanding of what the budget, what the surplus, what cuts, what all those things could be before we know which of these options, if any of them, make sense.
But for 50 years, that's the way that it's been done. This is the only year that you've had that opportunity. For 50 years, we've passed the levy 6 months before we even entered into the budget discussions. So this is not a new issue. It's also,
The budget.
no, we passed the levy before we passed the budget by about a 6 month. So this is not something new. I understand what you're saying, but let's talk about the reality of the situation here, and I'm not trying to ram things through. You've got a public hearing on the levy. You got to have a levy to have a public hearing on, and that's Monday. So the top priority tonight is to pass the levy, or pass, the recommendation on the levy. And then we can continue on with the discussion of the budget. It may seem backwards, but in terms of the hard deadlines that we have, that's kind of the way that we're probably going to have to proceed.
Right.
Alderman Mark, right.
And the nice thing about it, doing it this year, is we know what the actual hard number is to levy for, rather than doing an estimate those previous years. So I would be in favor, or a motion, that we levy for the fire and police. The IMRF and Social Security are gonna get eaten up by the budget surplus that is in here. And then we gotta look at the budget discussion on some possible other savings. Since we know that we have to pay that bill, that's what we do. And it's a compromise to a certain extent.
Just as a point of, I just want to say, as a point of clarification, to follow up on what Chair Peddle said, keep in mind the public hearing on the tax levy is Monday, November 14th. The first reading of the ordinance on the tax levy is November 28th. The second reading on the tax levy is December 12th. So we've already published for November 14th as far as the dollar amount on the public hearing for the levy.
We published the ceiling, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So Alderman Markwart, did you place a motion on the floor?
I guess I did. I put a recommendation out there.
Please
But if-
restate that.
No, I think he's saying
Your motion was for option 3?
I guess my motion is for option 3,
Okay.
as long as, if that comes out to 5492,940. It comes out to more than that when you put in the SSAs, but
Actually, even more than that. Yeah.
well, the city portion, okay. So the city portion come to us. The library portion goes there, and then the debt for the library goes there.
Yep.
I'm just strictly speaking about the fire pension, police pension,
4, 6, 7,
that part.
547, 5490.
5492,940. That's the total of the corporate.
Okay, we have a
and two
motion on
pensions.
the floor then to approve the levy as presented in option 3.
Sure.
Is there a second?
I'll second, and then if I may begin the discussion, I just want to be clear that then the rate we're looking at this point on that is the 1.1799 rate as presented at the bottom for the increase of 389,782, which covers the three main categories that Alderman Marquardt has suggested.
Other discussion, Mike?
Just point of order, is an option 4 allowed to be presented or created at this meeting? If, to Mr. Favor's point, he mentioned the creation of an option 4 to fit his idea. Is that allowable?
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
thank you.
You have a motion placed on the floor, seconded for option 3 at this
Okay.
point. Alderman Jacobson.
Again, I just want to make sure that everybody, even before taking this vote, understands what option 3 is. Option 3 is not only a delineation from our funding policy, but is also is walking away from our fund balance policy as well. So when we're talking how auditors and how the rating services are gonna look at this, we have made policies to try to correct that bond rating. And now we are doing the opposite of those policies.
Okay, then, can I ask a question?
Sure.
All right. The draft budget as it is, what's the fund balance percentage? I don't remember off.
It's right at 25%, the draft proposed that was submitted to you.
And it's got a $485,000 surplus, correct, in the general fund?
Currently, revenues are exceeding expenditures by that amount, yes.
And by getting rid of the IMRF and Social Security on here, that's 450,000, right? The estimated, whatever that was covered there, that's less than the 485. So right there, we're still at the 25% fund balance.
But the fallacy of that, Mike, is that the Finance Advisory Committee, I think at least a majority of us, some have not discussed it, believe that the revenue estimates for FY17 are a little bit high. So we don't think that fund, that surplus exists.
Right, and I'm leery of the revenue stream as well, but I also feel that we would cut expenses to follow those revenues as we go forward. And I gotta believe that in my head, so that if the revenues fall down, we gotta cut those expenses. That's, and correct me if I'm not, if I'm wrong. If the direction of the council is, we gotta stay at the 25, if the revenues go down, we're gonna figure out a way to cut expenses so that we stay at that fund balance, correct?
Right. And we are monitoring revenues, and I unfortunately don't have an answer for you tonight on the income tax. We're hoping to see something tomorrow. There's a possibility that sales tax might be looped into this problem as well, although we haven't seen a huge dip,
Does that
but there
make
has
sense?
been a dip, so.
But for one fact, that 25% fund balance includes that 454 surplus to make it to 25% at the end of the year.
Exactly.
So now you're reducing it, but for that fact, yes, it makes sense. You need that $400 surplus to make it to 25% at the end of the year.
Right.
If you don't have that, you're back down to 23%.
You can't use it
Exactly.
twice.
And that's already a rosy number, we're trying to use it 3 times.
No.
Yes.
The surplus is building the fund balance, Mike.
Right, the surplus goes into the fund balance.
25.7%.
As soon as your budget goes up, your surplus needs to go up.
Bob, did Alderman Snow?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't think we should be reducing our reserves that much, and we can talk about those cuts, but you're talking about pretty massive cuts, which will affect police, fire, and streets, make no mistake about it. It will affect services, and, you know, that discussion people want to have, I think we should have it. But don't believe that it won't affect personnel and won't affect services. And so I'm still in favor of option 2, which is still a drastic cut to probably our reserves. But I think, you know, since we had a large increase last year, which was necessitated by the pension, as one alderman mentioned a couple weeks ago, that was because of a decision in the early 2010 or 2000s to intentionally reduce our pension payments. The council at that time intentionally changed the funding formula in order to make cuts and to come up with a reserve. And that decision is coming back to bite us. And so therefore, I think we need to go with the new funding formula. And yes, we may have to dig into reserves partly this year to fund that, but since we had a large increase last year to make up, and that's the biggest part of the increase in the budget this year. It's not because we've increased other things, it's because of the pension increase that we had to come up with, because of past decisions. So I'm in favor of option 2 still.
Chair Biddle.
I share Alderman Snow's position. I will vote against this motion, but if there were a motion for option 2, I would support it. I don't think it's optimal. It does fully fund the police and fire and a portion of the IMRF, I believe, and Social Security was zeroed. That, you know, I don't think we're going to get option 1 to pass. And I think that, you know, in terms of responsibility, I could defend option 2, but option 3 I cannot defend.
Okay, Alderman Jacobson.
Again, I think there's some misnumbers out there. Our biggest increase in cost this year isn't the pension. It's only $800,000, which again isn't a small number in terms of household budgets. Our biggest issue is personnel, with a $3 or $4 million increase this year. And until we address that problem, again, $800,000 is a big hole. And last year we had to jump up and fill some of that hole in by that big increase. But continuing to increase, when we say we have to make cuts, people making less money to do the same job isn't necessarily a cut. They're still here doing the same job. And I'm not saying that's even gonna be a viable option for us to discuss. But to try to paint the argument that it's the pensions and we have to figure out the pensions, if we didn't have that $3 or $4 million increase in salaries, we'd have a $4 million.
We haven't increased salaries $3-4 million. I'm sorry,
Over the
David.
last 2
No,
years,
that is a gross exaggeration.
Look at the personnel costs. It's salary and benefits.
benefits, which includes pension.
Correct.
And the pension
It's
increased
over
about,
$3 million.
about 850,000, that's pension. Like I said, the majority of that is pension. Salary increases have been about 2.5%. That is nowhere near your gross exaggeration of $3-4 million.
Okay. At this point, we have a motion on the floor to approve option 3 of the tax levy. Is there further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call of Finance Advisory and then Council.
Neely,
No.
Verbic,
No.
Conlon,
Yes.
Parch,
No.
Peddle,
No.
Tarazinski,
Yes.
Markort,
Yes, since I made the motion, yes.
Snow,
No.
Noriko,
No.
Favor,
No.
Jacobson,
No.
Fanouken,
No.
motion fails.
Motion defeated, 3-9.
I move option 2.
It's been moved to approve option 2.
I'll second.
Moved by Chair Peddle, seconded by Ron Parch. Discussion.
So, for 70,000 more.
Mike Verbic.
I was a no on the last one and a no on this one, as I would support an option 4, which would get to Mr. Favor's point. That's the reason I'm voting no.
Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for
I
a
have a
vote.
question.
I'm sorry, Alderman Favor.
Would this be the time to make an amendment to the motion that's been seconded, or do we have to wait till it's approved?
No, if you're recommending an amendment to option 2, this would be the time.
Again, I would like to see if there's a way, so in option 2, there is about $462,000 that is listed as an increase. I would like to amend this motion to seek to reduce that $462,000 through non-core services by as much as possible.
Point of order. I don't think the amendment is germane.
And do you want to explain your rationale, Mike?
We're passing the tax levy. We're not working on the budget. If you want to take that up as a
Okay.
budgetary item, and I may even support that motion under the budget.
I'll restate that then. I move to amend option number 2 and remove the increase of $462,000. So it would be, the rate would have to decrease by 400, whatever that new rate would be, by reducing $462,000 from that amount.
No, then you're going back to, yeah.
It's a no rate increase. It's fully funding the pension increase.
No, it's.
It's not,
Wait a minute.
Right.
There's no second.
No, there isn't.
Well, I was trying to get the motion clarified.
Yeah.
But
I'm still new, but, you know.
Tony, you're amending the motion to reduce option 2 by 462,000.
Yeah, I guess in simple terms, my hope is to reduce the levy so that there is no rate increase, but through whatever I want to, again, it does get into a budget because I want to fully fund our pensions, but that's been part of what we're levying for is for additional pension dollars. I don't want to levy additional pension dollars. I want to pay our pensions, which is a budget item, but I don't want to have a levy increase.
If I
Point of
could-
information, please.
Alderman Fanouken.
Isn't the option 2 keeps the tax rate the same?
correct.
So that's really what you're trying to do, and then the number you're looking at, I think, is more on when we get to the budget discussion.
Thank
So I
you.
think the original motion would suffice in this point.
So either, Tony, do you wish to withdraw your motion, or I'll be glad to solicit a second?
No, at this point, I will withdraw that motion.
Okay. The amendment has been withdrawn. We're back to the original motion of approving option 2 then for the tax levy. Further discussion? Alderman Jacobson.
Again, I fully believe that we should be holding the rate of this year, especially with an 8% increase in EAV, that it already is an increase, obviously, showing the net 5.8.
You're speaking in favor of option 2?
Of option 2.
Okay.
Again, I don't support the fund balance dropping below the 25%, so I agree with holding the rate. I don't agree with robbing savings to do it. So until we can have a budget discussion, the answer is still no.
Okay. Other discussion? Alderman Faber.
So I guess that's one of my questions is how is the rate, because we have a policy that the fund balance will remain at 25%. And I think Alderman Marquardt was asking this question earlier. You're just saying if nothing changed, it would drop to 23%, but we have plans in place to reduce spending that it will always stay at 25%. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. So we
But
are gonna violate our policy.
Well, one, this is just the tax levy. So whatever levy is gonna be passed, there'll be an impact to fund balance potentially. During the budget discussion, I think you can also talk about that impact to the reserves, but.
Which we're gonna have in a short while, right?
The budget as proposed, okay, the budget as proposed, if this levy were to go through, your fund balance would drop to 23.85%. So yes, a vote for this without further action on the budget would reduce your fund balance below the policy.
And if I could just add to address Alderman Faber's comment. So yes, if you went with this one and the fund balance decreased, you would not be keeping with fund balance policy. But keep in mind, if you're going with this one, you're not keeping in line with the pension funding policy because you're not fully funding all the city's pension obligations. So you have a decision, if you're gonna go with all the policies, you go with all the policies. If you're not, then you have flexibility with how you're gonna deal with the policies. So this, and Chair Petal brought this up earlier, we are not going in accordance with our policy on fully funding pensions with any of these options.
But, and just to, I guess, echo some of the frustration in the room, that is, again, I come from corporate world, so it's much more difficult to think about. We have to pass an increase before we can work it out through the budget to get back to level ground. So we have to approve, and we have to say that we're gonna raise taxes on the residents before we can have our discussion on the budget and hopefully get enough votes to remove that increase if that's truly my desire or some of the other council members' desires or the committee's desire, that we have enough discussion and enough persuasion to get back to what we really want is no rate increase, and we really want to follow our policies, and we really want to fund our pensions.
Two things. I'm just making a statement in relation so that you know the playing field that you have here. And the second part of it is Director Haley pointed out to me that this was discussed last year, that this group wanted to have the discussion on the pensions levy before the budget. So we're following the direction of the discussion from last year.
I think some of the confusion, I think Chair Petal had a very eloquent point about the distinction between the budget and the levy. And so as you look at these options, staff has projected out the impact on the budget, making some assumptions about what the budget might be. But this joint body has not yet reached what the budget is or will be. So the fundamental thrust of option 1, 2, or 3 is the impact on the tax rate. And option 2 holds the rate the same and says this is what happens with your tax collection. But your concerns about the budget and the discussion about the budget is, as Chair Petal said, it's a separate topic and one that will be discussed. So the projections in here, they give you information on what happens if you adopt a budget that looks like this. That may not be relevant to what the council ends up ultimately adopting.
It's thinking in. So I'll just make a statement. So the way I'm looking at it as we approve option number 2, the rate stays the same. In this vote, we're violating our policies. When we talk about the budget, we can assure or request that all the policies are followed in the development of the budget and the approval of the budget, and therefore we meet our stated goals of funding the pensions and following our policies.
No, Chair, that's not correct. Unless you vote for option 1, you will violate your pension policy.
It's still not enough.
And it doesn't, it's
No,
not.
I'm just making a
Right.
factual
No,
statement.
but option 1 still does not totally do it because we're not totally funding IMRF and Social Security. It's only a portion there.
Right, okay.
So.
Fair enough.
So.
Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
But we do get money from these other contracts that help pay for that, so. You know, that does.
But option 1, if we were purists, let's be real, if we were purists here, we'd be going for option 1, because a year ago, we seemed determined it was gonna be 25%. I heard presenters and the city come in and talk about best practices, which was 20 to 22%. Somebody decided if 22 was good, 25 was better. And so, and I've only been on the C here, so I'm kind of like, I'm new. What I notice is, we spent a lot of time on this, and then the reality hits the road, and it's not popular. I totally understand that. I wouldn't want to face taxpayers either with the option 1. But I've sat here and thought, if I'm true to myself, I'll vote for option 1. I'm probably going to compromise and go for option 2, because I'm also a homeowner and a resident. You know what I'm saying? I know it's more comment than, but I hear all of your, and I agree with all of it. It's just, we do second guess ourselves a lot.
Further discussion? We have before us a motion to approve option 2. I'll ask for a roll call then. Finance Advisory Committee first.
Verbic,
Yes.
Conlon,
Yes.
Parch,
Yes.
Petal,
Yes.
Tarazinski,
Yes.
Neely,
Yes.
Snow,
Yes.
Noriko,
Yes.
Favor,
Yes.
Jacobson,
No.
Fanouken,
Yes.
Markhort,
No.
Ray,
No.
10 in favor.
So what was the vote of the council, please?
4 to 3. 4 in favor, 3 against. So, option 2 carried. Moving us to the 17 budget
John, can we
discussion.
take a recess, please?
Sure. Let's be back at 5:08.
Thank you.
5 of us present. Let's then move to the FY17 budget discussion. And let me turn to Finance Director Haley on this topic.
So I'm not gonna speak a lot, because I think this was meant to have discussion. I will say the fund balance based on the levy, has dropped below the 25%, which I think we're all aware of. So beyond that, I would like to say one thing. I had an email from Brad Cole, the Executive Director of IML. I had reached out to him last week. They did not know the reasoning why income tax has been plummeting, and it really has been dropping significantly. So I hadn't heard from him. I said I'm just touching base to see if there's any determination on the decrease in the income tax revenue we are receiving from the state of Illinois, and he says, not really. We've had several meetings with the Department of Revenue and the governor's office, but not a lot of clarity yet. He is going to be sending out a message to our membership, including us, the city of DeKalb, by or on Wednesday morning, hoping to get a few more answers before that, which is tomorrow morning. He then went on to ask about our sales tax numbers, that they are also seeing some negative trends with that in various communities. So just want to make sure everyone has heard that. That's the first I had heard of that, was just this afternoon, and so.
Is it, this one you're in?
Yeah.
Okay. So the other thing I would add, per our previous discussion, as we talked about in the last couple of meetings, if the Finance Advisory Committee, through the course of discussion on the budget, has any recommendations, in particular in relation to the revenues, then we would ask that those items be put on the table tonight. If there's formal recommendations, those be provided to us in writing tomorrow. And in light of the communication that Director Haley talked about, no action be taken tonight in regards to the revenues, that it would give us opportunity as staff to react to whatever concerns that the Finance Advisory Committee may have in relation to revenues. It will allow Director Haley and I to re-review our estimates and see if there's any issues with the trends, and come back a week from tonight in relation to the revenues. If there's any direction in relation to expenditures, that I think everything's on the table. That would be our recommendation as staff, and not have it be restricted to non-core services, because at this point, we don't have a list of what core or non-core services, so we would have to have everything on the table to be able to evaluate if there are reductions in expenditures.
Okay. Alderman Fanouken.
A question for Director Haley. With the, you had projected on the option 2 that we'd fall 1.3% below our target. What does that translate into as a dollar amount to give us a target?
So it's going to decrease that $485,000 revenue over expenditure amount by 462. So
Okay.
Basically, $462,000 needs to be made up for
All right,
somewhere.
well, that's what,
I'm sorry, 383,000.
383?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, 383,428, to be exact.
Discussion on the budget then. Finance Advisory, input?
And I will be trying to put the agenda together Thursday, so send me your I don't know, how do I do that? Can they send me their recommendations? Okay, it's by
Tom?
end of day tomorrow, 10 o'clock tomorrow night.
Thank you.
Was that before 10 o'clock tomorrow night?
Yes, although realistically, I'm probably not working on it after 10, so,
Okay.
but yeah, thereabouts, before you go to bed Wednesday. So I'll have them first thing Thursday.
Got it.
So 10 PM tomorrow night.
Wednesday, yeah.
I guess there's been some analysis done. I know I've taken a hard look, and I think each of you at your place have a copy of the revenue streams that the city uses tracking documents. The FAC had asked for this kind of information about a month ago or so, and it gives a good platform for us to discuss the trends in revenues and then compare those to what the budget expectation is.
Okay,
So
and
the-
those were previously provided on October 25th.
Right, that's exactly what I said, right, about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
You said they were asked for.
Oh, they were provided, yes, sorry.
Thank you.
There's a number of revenue projections here, and I hope everyone's had a chance to look at them. I know the Finance Advisory Committee has had some one-on-one discussion on some of these. There's 3 in particular that I'm going to call your attention to, rather than drag us through every one. At least in my opinion, most of them were okay, but there's 3 of concern. Director Haley had just mentioned sales tax and what she heard from IML, the IML director. If you look at home rule sales tax, I think that'll be your second page. And if you just look at the full year numbers, the actuals from 2014, 15, and 16, we go from 6.8 to 6.7 to $6.5 million. There's a negative trend in home rule sales tax, and of course, that's one of our biggest tax issues as far as revenue is concerned. There's only 1 month posted in the 16.5 column. It's down, but it's consistent with everything else. The concern on this one, and as you make a note here, note that 16 is about 2.2, 2.3% lower than 15. Our budget calls for a 3.7% increase from 16 to 17, 3.7. We've had 2 years of decreases. If the trend is 2% down and you go to a 3.7% increase, that's an increase, a relative increase of 5.7 points, right? That's a substantial amount of change. And I know there's some new stores and some new things happening, but I wanted to call your attention to that. I think the Finance Committee may make a recommendation. I have something to propose as we get through this. The second one is the municipal sales tax. Went from 5.2 million to 5.4, now down to 5.3, also showing a decrease year over year, fairly consistent with the home rule sales tax, though not as dramatic because this is a statewide tax, right? But it shows a decrease. And again, in this case, we are budgeting a 2.5% increase, hoping the trend doesn't continue down, but rather it's going to reverse itself and grow. The third one of concern is utility tax. And the utility tax is down a couple more pages, but if you look at those totals, it's 2.7 million to 2.5 to 2.4. Year over year, that's an 8% decrease. 16 from 15, the trend is down. Our budget at this point on utility tax is about 2.550. It's actually an increase year over year. So when you put those 3 together, if the trends continue, we will have severe gap. If you just wanted to say it would stay flat, that would reverse the downward trend. But if you said it was going to stay flat, those 3 items alone against this next year's budget would be $620,000 in revenue risk. $620,000 in revenue risk on those 3 items. That's just assuming they're flat and the trend downward does not continue. So that was a concern of the FAC members, and I wanted to bring those forward to you. They're significant, and they would be problematic or additive to the discussion that you've already had on the property tax levy. If we're looking for $380,000 there, and you have concerns about this revenue stream, you'd be pushing something more substantial. If the community's employment base, medium income base, NIU student base, NIU employee base is all shrinking, and these revenues continue downward, than the structural problems that were identified during the budget discussion by Director Haley, saying these are not able to be sustained, is even more exacerbated if these trends continue. So those were the opening comments relative to discussion on revenue that I had.
Director Haley.
Thank you. First of all, I want to add, I'm always concerned about sales tax revenue because of how dependent we are on that revenue source and 2 large stores, and that's very significant for the city. So I do obviously monitor. These are my working documents. These are drafts. These are not audited. You know, I do tie them out to the CAFR, but these are my working documents, and I look at them weekly. Even if they don't change, I'm constantly looking at them. There was some, concern in the monthly tracking in 14 and 15, so I'm not sure that the months are accurate until you get to 16, 16.5. And we absolutely track on the correct liability a month at this point. So I don't want to create a heady penny. If I look at the last 3 months this year to the last 3 months at the same time frame for home rule sales tax, I actually show an increase of 2.4%. So yes, sales tax is always a concern of mine, but I'm not sure that it's as large of a concern as Committeeman Tarazinski is saying. But again, absolutely would look to any recommendations that you have. Utility tax, I'm actually trending out this rest of 16.5, and we're coming in over the 16.5 budget. Utility tax is very dependent on weather. We had a very mild winter, so it's a hard revenue to kind of project. And I would add, these are projections, and we are constantly adjusting anything we do based on these projections. So I look at every single revenue source. I have every single revenue we have that I've projected through 16.5. That includes, all of our revenues across the board. And my biggest concern right now, of course, is income tax. So, I've dropped my projection $450,000, and the significant impact would be that income tax revenue. So I am really looking forward to hearing from the IML and seeing what they have to say.
Just one other comment. I did not comment on income tax, knowing that it was totally up in the air. These are without the income tax problem, that 600,000 potential risk.
Other comments, discussion? Lynn? Neely?
Thank you. I am supportive of Tom's comments, and I wanted to add just a little to it for a thought for extending these revenue projections very far in the future. One thing that I wanted to bring to your attention that would affect both the types of sales tax revenue and ultimately our portion of the Illinois state income tax has to do with the revenues at NIU slipping, the on-campus students, because they do generate quite a bit of retail activity, and of course there's taxes from that. And the drop this fall in the on-campus freshmen was particularly concerning to me because when new freshmen move into residence halls, they buy things to outfit those residence halls, sheets and towels, and that's potentially a very large retail bump, hopefully, at least part of it, to be here in DeKalb. Unfortunately, the enrollment figures, whether it's new freshmen, on-campus programs, or total for NIU have been in decline for a while. And this affects us as a municipality, because even if, this is information from the College Board, and it's self-reported by universities, the recommended budgets they have for students. Even if you eliminate tuition fees, room board, books and supplies, and transportation, at a four-year institution, students will usually spend a little over $2,000 each year. And I realize that's only $2,000, but it is $2,000 we might get some tax revenue back on. Also, although it hasn't been enormous, the number of persons employed at NIU has gone down across categories. And this, once again, probably affects retail sales revenues and ultimately could affect our portion of the Illinois income tax. The reason I bring that up is because since students who live in the residence halls and students who live in the apartments and in the houses are counted by the Census Bureau as part of our population. I realize all of you probably know this by heart, but just in case somebody that might be watching us doesn't know that, that's why it's very, very important, because if I understand correctly, the part of the Illinois income tax that we receive is based on our population. Yes?
Correct. It's based on the 2010 census population, and it would
Right.
not change unless we requested a special census to be done, which I don't think we
will
would.
they change it in 2020?
2020 would be the next time that it would.
Okay,
yes,
well then we're
exactly.
safe for a little while.
Well, I mean, it's good for us to know that and, make sure we're.
To look ahead, because some of these
Absolutely.
budget figures do run out to 2021.
Right.
Yeah.
And it would take, I think, a year or two if we looked at what happened in 2010. And I'm keep pointing to Joellen because she's much more versed in this than I am, for that to impact the income per capita revenue, so 2021 or 2022.
Well, in the meantime, though, those NIU students, although some locals may get aggravated at them in traffic, by George, they do spend money. And we do get to tax that money, and that's important to our plans as a government to be able to fund things. So it might be something to consider on revenue projections out into the future, that this could have a dampening effect on your home rule tax and the municipal sales tax as well.
Part of the
Thank
thing,
you.
I'll just jump in, is we've had discussions with NIU, and we're trying to identify the number of students that that live on campus or that could be counted as part of the number, because I've heard different people in the time I've been here of what is DeKalb's real population. Is it the 44,000 with the students or without the students? And so, right now, NIU is not able to identify that number, but it's something that we've talked about to try to identify in the next couple of years prior to the 2020 census. One of the other issues to think about is, as we've seen a decrease in the number of students, some of the apartments where the students previously left are being backfilled by families. So one of the things we're gonna have to look at with community development is, what is the average number of people per household? Is because you see, and I've seen this in different communities, where between censuses, you can see that average number go up, that average number go down. So as the number of students may be decreasing, they may be backfilling with more families that are living in those apartments. So we're gonna have to look at a variety of factors over the next couple years leading up to the 2020 census, as well as trying to determine the exact amount of time of when the revenue of when the federal government, the Census Bureau, is gonna take that data from the 2020 census and when it's gonna impact us. I've seen from the 2010 census to the 2000 census to the 2010 census, the Census Bureau narrowed that time frame. It took them less time from 2000 to 2010. So we'll have to see, we want to chart out exactly when did it hit the budget in 2010 or 2011 or 2012, and then be able to look at when that's going to happen in 2020. Because you're right, looking at the numbers right now, in 2021, we're assuming that it stays the same based on the population. So it's something that is on our radar screen that we will be examining and digging deeper in the next couple of years.
Chair Pennell?
Just a couple of factual statements. First of all, your population includes the students that live in DeKalb, regardless of whether they live on campus or off campus within the city of DeKalb. Okay? And I can tell you that not only from knowing that, but from working for the Census Bureau and actually editing long forms. So there's no question that is included. second of all, and this is something that I'm not sure the university tracks very well, but they should. You know, there has been a disagreement as to what proportion of employees live in the city of DeKalb. And anecdotally, it has increased over time. Now,
Who you consider an employee, whether it's a graduate assistant or a
well,
support worker?
correct. No, I'm talking about the full-time, part-time, non-student employees. And I'm not taking a position as to whether it's increased or decreased, but that, any change in that number is also going to affect the population. And I'll just leave it there. We have a lot to discuss.
Mike?
Is there a legal date certain that we have to pass the budget by? A drop dead deadline that the budget absolutely has to be passed by?
I know the tax levy has to be filed by December 28th, if that's last Tuesday of the month. And
I think
December 27th.
with the city's adoption of the calendar year budget process, if we got into the next calendar year and didn't have a functional budget, that would present some significant operational challenges.
Yeah, I think that you have to have a budget by the end of the fiscal year. So I think your drop dead date is December 31st, but that may not be considered to be a business day. I'm not sure about that, and I don't even remember what day of the week that falls on this year.
It's a Saturday.
But you have to back up from that with respect to first reading, second reading, and your public hearing. So as the city council's schedule goes, okay, you've got to back up potentially 3 meetings from the 31st. So that puts you, for your public hearing, when are you having it, the 28th of November on the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other budget discussion? Tom?
I guess to bring this to some kind of conclusion, if, to remove some risk from the budget, looking at those revenue trends on those 3 particular items I talked about earlier, and to remain conservative, and to understand that the council's desire is to maintain that 25% fund balance, you would be looking at further reductions if we would recommend these revenue adjustments that I'm discussing, in addition to that 380,000 or whatever number that was earlier. The other thing about this discussion is the unsustainability aspect. You know, last year we spent some time discussing all of our tax rates, and we looked at all the comparables from the university towns and 10 or 12 other entities that Director Haley put together for us. And I think it would be appropriate, at least at our next meeting, to maybe bring those back, because if we don't find new revenue streams where our tax rates are under the average, like we found in water, we have a structural issue in a community that's having problems maintaining its revenue base, and therefore it won't be able to maintain its spending base either, without exorbitant rate increases that are above the norm, I'll put it that way. And that in itself has a deleterious effect on the remaining citizens. To suggest that tax rates can go up ad infinitum and has no impact on long-range planning of citizens, I think is also something that we have to consider. So that's why I like that strategic budget discussion, Chair. We never get to talk about this stuff in a serious way, but if we think about it in those terms, it's a very difficult conversation to have, and it's significant from even where we are and what we've accomplished. So again, you'd be looking at material reductions, which would be also permanent reductions in their nature. Until that revenue can exceed that 3% level, where you're getting real growth above the norm, you know, the way your salaries and benefit costs continue to escalate at 5 to 6% per year in total, the equation does not balance without real growth or 6% inflation like the old days. That's how things were balanced, in my opinion, in the old days. You had enough inflation to generate some revenues and keep within the normal boundaries. But when you got 1%, 2% inflation, the equation doesn't balance. And until that comes back, this is a real serious problem that we need to deal with.
Mike?
So then you're at about $1 million.
Yeah, actually, the
Delta.
$850,000 that Alderman favor may not be a wrong number. From a discussion standpoint.
Okay. So, further discussion. Alderman Jacobson.
Are we gonna go through the budget at all? Is that what we're doing in a budget hearing?
That's what we're doing.
I'm saying going through it. We used to go through department by department, what those expenditures were, why they've changed.
We did that.
And from our perspective, if you have particular questions, we'd be happy to answer the questions. You may have gone in more detail previously, but our goal is to provide the overview of the budget, to try to address the policy issues, the direction the council has given previously. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Where do we start? That's the case. First question I saw quickly, only because it's on my list of discussion points. Have we reduced public service funding to 0 this year?
Human service funding?
Yeah.
It was moved from
What department
legislation
was it
to
moved to?
community development.
Okay, so that's gone to community development. This is to development. All right. I guess if we're not going through it, again, it would take someone with a outstanding financial mind and understanding of budgets, especially to be able to track when so many things are moving around between fiscal year to fiscal year. I mean, it would take somebody with in-depth knowledge to really understand those things just by reading through this.
Dave, those are questions that, as an example, that I've posed to Kathy Haley, and she or Bob Miller have been able to point me directly to the comparative numbers. So I would
understand that,
encourage,
but-
make your list, provide that to Kathy, and she can address
In order
those
for
concerns.
the board of directors to have a discussion of policy and those things, they have to have that in-depth knowledge, and if there's questions, I certainly hope they're being answered, and I love to hear that at least individuals are doing that. But again, in terms of a living budget document, well, we used to go through it, not necessarily line item by line item, but department by department, for those that didn't have the benefit of understanding all the jumping around and the increases in costs, to really get an in-depth knowledge of why those costs are rising and why those different budgeted amounts are changing.
And Alderman Jacobson, that was our attempt at last meeting. We tried to provide the high-level overview of the largest 3 departments in police, fire, and public works that constitute 74% of the general fund budget. So we tried to address what are the particular issues that they're facing, where they've made cuts in order to create the revenues in excess of expenditures. So we believe we've done that. And as we've indicated, and maybe this is a misnomer, we've said it as close to a status quo budget as possible outside of the reduction in expenditures. The one main item that we're recommending is the expenditure in regards to the priority-based budgeting. Any of the other items that were listed in the memo from last week, any of those items that, and we're talking a couple $1,000s, if they were added in, we made the department cut and reduce an expenditure. We collectively, as an executive team, went through all those expenditures, whether they were in the operating budgets, whether they were relation to vehicles, whether they were relation to equipment or technology, and we made those decisions collectively. So That was the goal last week, so that you could hear from the fire chief, the public works director, and the police chief, some of those things, either those cuts that they've made and the impact on their services. So that was our goal last week.
Again, I struggle with that. When you say collectively, staff has done that collectively. The person paying the bill, the resident, is not at that table. And it's unless one of us is intimately involved in that budget-making document, which we aren't, nor is the Finance Advisory Committee, then, again, it would take someone with whole understanding to read through this at home and understand how some of these numbers work. And I think that's a disservice to the council members, just in theory.
Social service funding, Dave, is on page 103.
It's been moved, and I just
For
wanted
FY
to see where it had
17,
gone.
page 103.
Again, at some point, there are soft costs in this budget for certain that reducing definitely wouldn't necessarily be an impact to service on residents on their day-to-day. And I think we have to have that discussion. It's gonna be an uncomfortable conversation. So, again, if no one else has any, I have a dozen at least. And again, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but I think it's things that at least we should be having the discussion of at some point. There are things obviously in here that are clearly soft costs that a priority-based budget would probably, and not probably, will definitely put in that fourth quartile. And again, it's gonna be up to the council whether or not they feel that the value of that service, knowing what that value is, and some of them, again, are very easy to pick out in this budget, are worth to the community and worth raising taxes for. Jesus, I have over a dozen. Again, I had originally developed this list for the benefit of trying to figure out how to start funding CIP and roads specifically at this point, roads and vehicles. Now, not only do we have that hole, but we have this new 462,000 we need to come up with. And I certainly think, at least with some of these, we can get there. First off, 10% salary reduction across the board. Again, not a comfortable conversation. Our employees are making an average of $122,000 a year, 4 times the average household income. That is leading residents in a struggling community to have a lot of distaste with what's going on in this building, whether it's by their elected officials or by the staff that is serving them, with a 12% cut at the management level. Looking at the last couple of years with the change in regime, again, we had to do that staffing study. And we saw the reality is that some of our positions were at the bottom end of the pay scale or off the pay scale. And I found it amusing the other day when a discussion was had here in the building when someone said, well, we're not the suburbs. Then we shouldn't be paying what the suburbs are paying. Unfortunately, the reality is, in a community that is struggling, where the people are not making that money, they do not feel adequately represented by people at that salary level. And there's a discussion there, how that works, whether it's through part-time staffing, whether it's through different options. Again, it's a in-depth conversation. In addition to that, at this point, 3 years across the board, no raises for anyone here. Again, there is no reduction in services because you get paid the same amount you got paid today. There is no reduction there. I appreciate the facts that our union employees and our non-union employees want to get paid more every year. Every resident in this town wants to get paid more every year. With stagnant inflation and stagnant growth, that's not occurring. And that's what's creating our skew of increased costs year over year. Reduce the senior management staff by no less than 3 employees. Again, that's going to take some hard discussions to do. I realize we've staffed up to meet a lot of these roles and individualized roles. Can our community afford it? And again, those jobs were being met in our community before they were so diversified. So the service level to the average resident generally won't change in doing so. Cutting crossing guards. Again, we've already discussed that as a reality. It's not a responsibility the city should be responsible for. It's a school district problem that the school district is creating, and I understand they don't have the money to fund it. But again, it's not up to the city to take on that role purely for the fact that the district won't cover their cost with the 70% allocation of property taxes they're getting. And they're gonna have to make some difficult decisions because of that decision. Convert all non-essential staff from full-time to part-time or volunteer. Again, to take a water bill, to do some of the clerical tasks, well, it's great to have full-time employees. The benefits and the pensions and the health insurance is killing us. NIU has done it across the board in most of their departments. They've gone to civil service in many of their departments, either full-time or part-time. They've gone to a lot more internship positions. They've gone to a lot more grad assistant positions. They've gone to a lot more adjunct professors for that reason, because their model and their structure had to change to allow them to operate in the difficult times we're in. Well, the discussion was just mentioned, we're at a status quo. Status quo doesn't benefit the resident. Status quo benefits the employee. We're not here to represent the employees. We're not partners of the employees. We are the leaders. We are the directors of the employees on behalf of the people that elected us. And I understand that it's difficult when you work with the people in this building to have those discussions with them. But the reality is that is who we're here to represent. And it's a discussion that, again, we should probably be engaging in, whether it's this budget year or going forward. Cut all non-essential budget expenses. Again, social service funding. That is not our role as a government, as a essential services provider, to be providing necessarily these services. And I understand it's going to be difficult for them to cope with that. I think we should develop other opportunities for them to replace that funding, and we can act as that conduit and facilitate that discussion, whether it's charging in the municipal lots parking and have those groups come out and work the municipal lots to make that money, whether it's offer other fundraising opportunities or other self-sustainable methods for those groups to replace that funding. Again, $150,000 a year, significant amounts of it that were used for political power and influence 10 or 15 or 20 years ago to court votes for candidates on this board has to be reevaluated, especially to those groups that don't even bother filling out the forms every year and meeting their responsibilities. Things like cell phones, things like sponsorships. We have to reevaluate all those things. Again, everybody here in the room has a cell phone. Why is the city paying $60, $70, $80 a month when we can use digital services, Google Voice, digital voicemails, those things to forward through very effectively at either a fraction of the cost or free? Dues and subscriptions. Again, if you look in the budget and find that line item, it has gone up significantly over the last several years. And while I understand that those things contribute to the professional management credentials and those things, at what point is it not a value to the taxpayer? I appreciate the fact that a lot of our employees want to go to conferences and want to get the continuing education, and they should, making $125,000 a year out of their pocket. To pay them to go and then pay them to be there and then pay for the conferences, that line item alone is what, $250,000 this year? Up from over $100,000 2 or 3 years ago? At some point, it's a soft cost, and I think we have to evaluate those costs. Switch our digital service phone system, utilizing our existing VoIP technology. And looking at the cost of what we're paying here for our VoIP service, we expected a massive discount over those numbers. I remember the switch from traditional landline-based phones to VoIP, and we expected it was going to save us 80 or 90%. In reality, it's only at 8 or 9% with our current provider. There are significant resources in the digital technology voice over IP field at this point that I certainly will have a discussion with the IT director when they come on board to try to facilitate those. Our system now is probably circa 1985. To get a hold of someone in this building, the police department is certainly upgraded, and it's a wonderful system to use. The city hall system of not being able to get a hold of individual employees and having to go through gatekeepers and I have to call Ruth to transfer me to someone else. That's not fair to her. She's not a switchboard operator.
You don't carry a directory of city extensions?
Not in my back pocket, no.
Okay. It's
I would
probably
guess
available
most of the people
digitally,
here
Dave.
don't. When I pick up the phone and make a phone call, I usually need to get a hold of someone, and unfortunately, I work a full-time job, so to spend the time to run home to get a paper copy or even try to pull it up somewhere is a waste of time for me. Explore part-time positions in both police department and fire department. Again, that's not a reduction in service, that's a reduction in overtime. There are many departments that have part-time employees. I was in Elburn last night and they were discussing the value of having a part-time police officer. Again, they are using it to reduce their overtime and fill them into slots that otherwise would be overtime time and a half positions. It's a discussion that we've briefly touched on 3 or 4 times, and I know our city has been resistant to doing it, but at the size of our community and the fact that we are already acting as a regional hub for our other departments, it's something we have to start having the discussion of whether or not it makes sense, how to implement it, and how to reduce some of the overtime and even maybe some full-time positions over time. Create larger volunteer, non-certified police department officers to reduce OT. Again, when we have officers out doing things like being crossing guards at $30 an hour plus, when we have officers out standing in front of barricades at Cornfest, when we have officers doing what non-certified officers can do, and I realize there is some benefit through the community policing model to have them out there, at what cost? When we can have a representative in a city of DeKalb uniform meeting that same goal for a fraction of the price. Discuss discontinuing lockout service. Again, I realize the community service component. If we can find an internship way or a volunteer-based effort to do that, great. But again, at $30,000, it's room in the department budget we can cut. Require school district to fully fund or fully reimburse us for the community service officer. Again, it's something that is a necessary benefit to the schools, but that's an employee that's effectively out of our department, out of our budget, that is benefiting the school nearly at 100%. They should be paying us for that service. Discontinue leaf pickup service. Again, it was amusing that came up in a meeting this week. And we'll know shortly what that service actually costs us. And again, it's a duplicative service. And the fact that Waste Management already provides that service to residents, and a significant cost problem on our end to adequately staff and equip those people to do effectively the same job. Hire an internal part-time cleaning crew. Again, this isn't going to be the end-all be-all of the budget, but to pay $90,000 a year plus to clean our toilets when the owner of that company is driving around in a new Tesla says something. It says something about us and our community. The fact that we were getting that service for 1/3 of the price effectively now than we're paying now, and having the exact same service provider in the old company do the work at a $60,000 a year overhead is a problem for me. And I think we can look to try to restructure that deal. Explore outsourcing of all lawn maintenance and other non-public or other public works services, bush trimming, those things that we're doing there. Again, we have a provider in town that's doing it at a fraction of the cost for our abatements and other work that we're having him do now, a fraction of the cost of even one employee, and having several employees on and the equipment on to do that full time. Again, we need to reevaluate those things. Discontinue payment of those costs related to donated space with Youth Service Bureau and Elder Care Services. Not only are we giving them a free building, we're paying for the utilities, we're paying for their phones, we're paying for all of those those services. And again, I don't think that's necessarily fair. Are other nonprofits in the community receiving those benefits? To give them to one or two, especially the fact that we're giving them a free building, they have to be self-sustainable and cover their costs. Temporarily discontinue all bike path projects until we can adequately fund CIP. We have spent more in bike path projects, and again, I understand that there's a reality that a lot of that is grant funded. But we have spent more on bike path projects in this community than we have on roads the last 5 years. That makes a lot of residents scratch their heads. Switch to open source software licensing in all instances where available to eliminate our licensing fees. We pay over $100,000 a year in licensing fees for very simple task-based software, things like our email server, things like Microsoft Word, things like Excel, that we easily can find a very comparable, very well-supported product in the market, open source, at zero cost. Discontinue the municipal band funding. Again, they're a great aspect in our community, but there's a reason so many communities have discontinued them. To pay $60,000 a year for that service, when we don't have the adequate money to fund our roads or fund our departments right now, doesn't seem to make sense to me. Do I think they should go away? No. Do I think we need to facilitate a conduit that they can be self-sustainable? Absolutely. But for us to continue to fund it blindly year after year, I think is a disservice to the taxpayer. Look to outsource beautification efforts, the planning, the landscaping, and other cleanup jobs to student and community groups, especially at the college and Kish, that have programs designed to teach those skills that they can both learn while they're volunteering for the city. Explore more internship opportunities to utilize students in operations. Again, while we have some management interns, there are several other opportunities here, both in grant writing and public works and maintenance and those things that may not be necessarily professional MPA level internships, but can give students a hands-on experience in the field at a fraction of the cost or free to supplement some of the cuts we have to make. Explore outsourcing options for HR, payroll, IT, engineering, and some public works functions. That's where the private sector is going. HR and payroll is outsourced in companies of our size up to much larger ones. And I realize we've committed now to doing it, having an internal HR person, but to have the resource and knowledges of a national provider of those services in terms of payroll that can cut the cost significantly and to give more internal training options, I think we need to see the numbers on that to make an adequate decision if it makes sense or not. IT and engineering would be the same way for me. And my last one would be to reduce the city manager's spending authority to $10,000. And again, I think that's just a stronger check on some of the changes in the budget that are going on. I don't think it's necessarily a knock on character or an attack on them. I just think it's a better practice for us to keep an eye on. Along with some of our hiring going forward, require that the city manager denote the relationship between any candidate and the current management team staff and their prior history together. I think there is a growing group in the community, whether fairly or unfairly, that are projecting the model that the current management staff is hiring friends from around the communities they worked at to come and work in our community. And whether that's true or not, and again, I don't think it's an attack at all, but for transparency's sake and for the understanding of council, being that we don't have really any say other than the final approval of that hiring process, to understand the relationships of the employees that are coming in and understand what their relationships are to other management staff in the building, where they've worked together, what their relationships were they supervisors of one another. I just think it's a best practice that will alleviate that view of an attack on our staff, and especially on our council, and it's just a best practice we can implement. Again, there's a lot of requirements there. There's a lot of ideas there. I'm not saying all of them are the greatest idea. I'm not saying any of them are even feasible. But these are the discussions we need to be having at these budget hearings. These are the discussions, when you get down to it, that are the fluff in the budget that, again, are $1 million or $2 million. Some of them more in terms of cost reductions and salaries. But that only gets us to where we need to be now to cover the expenditures we have right now. Going forward, we have to change the way we do things. And to have those discussions will take a significant amount of time and focus and back up by the staff and an in-depth understanding provided by the staff so we can make those decisions. And not having those discussions and just saying, well, here's the document and it's status quo, maybe next year, we're not getting to where we need to be, and the system's not changing, and the liabilities are soaring.
Thank you for your list, Dave. I'm not going to expect a response to that list on the fly. I'm going to ask City Manager Director Haley to take those recommendations under advisement. I would encourage other council members to provide your list of items that you either question in this budget by line item or have not had an opportunity to discuss. Please identify those so that Anne Marie and Kathy can address them. City Manager.
Mayor, I need to address this. When someone challenges my character and ethics in a public meeting, I have to address this. I've always been very open on any of the staff members that I've hired. Of all the executive team members that I've hired in the time I've been here, I've had the privilege of working with 2 prior to my arrival. The others I have, that I've hired, I have not. I would think that any of you that are in an executive position that is responsible for hiring know the benefit of working with someone in advance. You know their work ethic, you know their character, you know how good they are, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses. So for people in the community or whatever the terminology, then I would like to talk to them directly. I'd be happy to talk to you, Alderman Jacobson. I take affront to that. All the people that I've hired and this executive team is the best group of people I've worked with in my entire career. I've had the privilege of working in 6 municipalities, and this by far is the best team. If someone wants to challenge my character, tell them to walk in my office tomorrow. I'll talk to them.
Asking for more transparency is not a challenge at your character, and I apologize you took it that way.
Mayor, may I add?
Certainly.
Being involved from the HR perspective in all the hiring in the almost 2 years that I've been here, absolutely the most qualified applicant, regardless of whether anyone on the team has worked with them or not in the past. I can say with 100% certainty that the most qualified applicants have always been selected for a position. Everything was considered, and everyone was treated equally and fairly through every step of the recruitment process. So that is something that I can assure to 100% because I have been involved in every single one of them as I was leading the HR initiatives for the past 2 years. So, again, as City Manager Gora stated, I would be more than happy to also sit down from an HR perspective to outline the equal employment opportunity processes that we follow and adhere to every recruitment and hiring law before us. So everything has been up to par and up to law.
Thank you. Chair Petal.
I think that our discussion is degenerating to the point where we're not making progress toward decision-making with respect to the budget. With due respect, I support the fact that the ideas that are being put forth need to gel and be taken up at the next meeting, and I do appreciate that, Mayor. I don't know what other people think, but if somebody's got some other ideas to put on the table, we should certainly recognize those and get them on the table for discussion next week. But we're getting to a point where I'm perceiving diminishing returns to continuing the meeting.
Tom?
Thank you. I guess I would feel it might be appropriate, Chair, to try and boil down a couple recommendations that I could see putting on the table by 10 o'clock tomorrow night through you, and if you want to forward those.
Well, I think you can just forward them
Okay.
directly.
Well, I'm just going to verbalize a couple of them, so
Okay.
everyone
Sure.
knows what's coming. I think we've pretty much articulated at least some of the concerns on the revenue piece. I think those are additive to that $380,000 bogey that we started with the cut of the property tax revenue. And I would suggest that a recommendation would be made to offset that and to reset the revenue streams on those three items I mentioned to be flat with 2016 actuals that were part of this document, so that Director Haley would have a specific number in the recommendation. That's roughly $600,000 to make them flat. That would stop the negative decline, and hopefully that would occur, but to minimize the risk, and any spending increases in the future then would be based on us having the revenue base that we actually achieve with new stores, new growth, new economics to fund any increase in personnel. Further, besides the recommendations to the revenue reductions, would then be to make a recommendation by the Finance Advisory Committee to reduce the spending target in the 17 budget by $1 million. And that would give you some leeway in the council to go up or down some amount of monies, but at least some kind of a ballpark that could be looked at. That would be my draft for tomorrow.
I would view those to be individual recommendations. I don't think that there needs to be.
Right.
And I'm completely supportive of discussing both of those issues. I think that we put on notice, and I think there's a varying level of concern about those issues, none of which begins at anything but a level of concern.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
So, you know, the action steps, I think we'll have to discuss. And as we have done this evening, when we have that discussion, the Finance Advisory Committee will then vote on any things that come forward as a motion to make that recommendation, and then the council can respond to that. I certainly would need much more information and a much longer discussion before I were able to take a position on either of those, even though I do share the concern.
Ron, Arch?
I would just like to see those proposals in writing and maybe some of the ramifications. It's easy to throw out a number, and then when you get into which is what Kathy Haley and her group will do, then come out with the recommendations. They'll be the bad people because we won't like. I'd like to see, I'm not disagreeing with it. I feel compelled to comment too on some of the dire cuts I've just heard. I will tell you, having relatives in real estate, I always feel I bring up the spirit of the quality of life. I would never live in a city if we had a third of the stuff I heard eliminated. People look for places to live based on quality of life. They don't worry about if there's no trees in the parkways or if there's no trees, period, so they don't have to rake leaves. They look at what kind of services do you have, what is the quality of life. They look at what are your schools like if you have kids. And so we should be careful when we just start cutting and eliminating these. One other comment I'm going to make, having worked there years ago when I came to DeKalb and from Texas, excuse me, to go to graduate school, I worked at the Youth Service Bureau, and I can tell you in the region, DeKalb is viewed as a very progressive and forward-thinking city because you have services like YSB and that we take care of our senior citizens. So I'm just advocating for that. I would never be okay as a citizen if we got rid of some of these services.
Thank you. Further discussion on the budget? Anyone want to add comment this evening? You heard the request to have any suggestions for recommendations you want considered for the November 15th meeting to Kathy and Anne Marie by 10 o'clock tomorrow night to give adequate preparation time on those items. Anything further on the budget? Seeing none, I'll confirm our next meeting is November 15th I assume that time is 5:30 again?
Yes.
Is that acceptable? And then,
Motion to adjourn.
it's been moved to adjourn by Alderman Jacobson. Is there a second? Seconded by Alderman Noriko. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Carried.